Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves drifting back in time, stepping quietly through the shadowed halls of grand palaces and dimly lit bedchambers. The air smells faintly of sweet incense, mixed oddly with something sharp and earthy, perhaps herbs crushed by candlelight. It's here, amid silk curtains and whispered secrets, that you'll discover some of the strangest methods noble couples used in their desperate quest to conceive a child. And if you thought your aunt's just relaxed fertility advice was frustrating, wait until you hear these medieval tips. Honestly, you probably won't survive this with your sanity fully intact. So before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 a.m? Or maybe starting your day in a rainy city? Eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other, we're not alone out here. Now dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey together here on Timeless Sleep. You find yourself stepping lightly over marble floors in a great royal chamber. A fire crackles gently, throwing dancing amber shadows across embroidered tapestries and golden ornaments. Yet despite the grandeur around you, something in the air feels oddly anxious. This is a royal bedroom, after all, a place where dynasties are born or quietly extinguished. It's easy to forget that behind all the pomp and ceremony, noble couples faced intense pressure to produce heirs. And as you pause to glance toward the large, opulent bed adorned with crimson velvet curtains and elaborate carvings, you can't help but sense that desperation often drove these powerful families toward practices that were anything but conventional. The royal bed itself was never just a bed. It was practically a stage, an altar, a battleground, and sometimes, more strangely, a kind of magical vessel. For noble houses throughout history, conception was less about romance and more about rituals. Forget candlelit dinners or romantic poetry. When noble bloodlines needed heirs, they turned to methods far more mystical, bizarre, and occasionally downright hilarious. Take, for instance, the careful arrangement of royal bedrooms. In some kingdoms, beds had to face specific directions, often eastward, to align with the sunrise, ensuring the morning's first golden rays would bless the couple. Imagine shifting an enormous oak bed, heavy with gold inlays and velvet cushions, all because the astrologer insists the morning sun will help produce a male heir, and you thought feng shui was tough. You might wonder how much sleep the nobles actually got, considering their endless efforts to follow such precise instructions. But it didn't stop at positioning. Noble couples also often believed in magical bedding. Quite literally, bed sheets weren't just sheets. They could be spells woven from fabric. Picture a team of royal seamstresses, carefully embroidering protective symbols and ancient runes into silk sheets to encourage conception. Each thread, dyed carefully in vibrant colors, gold, crimson, emerald, held promises whispered by witches or blessings murmured by priests. The night a royal couple lay upon these enchanted sheets, they were supposedly enveloped in magic capable of coaxing even the most stubborn heir into existence. Yet sometimes, embroidered runes weren't enough. In some traditions, special herbs were stuffed into pillows and mattresses to encourage fertility. You're probably imagining lavender or chamomile, peaceful and soothing, right? Well, not always. Herbs like mandrake root, notorious for its alleged screaming when pulled from the earth, or even crushed garlic cloves might have been sprinkled within bedding. Mandrake, of course, was especially popular due to its humanoid-shaped root, believed to promote the creation of a child. Imagine the delicate scent of garlic wafting gently as you drift into sleep. Hardly the romantic fragrance one expects on a night meant for heirs, but royal desperation was rarely elegant. Then there were the charms placed around the bed itself. Ever seen a noble bedstead carved intricately with symbols? Those weren't purely decorative. Each carving was meticulously designed to attract fertility deities or ward off infertility curses. Small carvings of rabbits, naturally prolific breeders, were particularly popular, as were turtles, symbols of endurance and longevity. Some noble families even placed live animals, like frogs or rabbits, in cages beneath the bed, believing their mere presence could inspire fertility. Imagine drifting into sleep with a soft chorus of frog croaks coming from beneath your mattress, their rhythmic serenades encouraging you to dream of heirs. If animals weren't enough, there was always the more bizarre practice of using certain stones and crystals placed around or under the bed. Emeralds, moonstones, and pearls each had supposed properties that could encourage conception. Emeralds, considered sacred stones of Venus, were believed to enhance fertility. Moonstones, glowing gently in the flicker of candlelight, were said to harmonize with lunar cycles, helping the queen's body align with nature's rhythm. Pearls, meanwhile, symbolized purity and protection, placed discreetly around the royal bedchamber to guard against negative energies. Yet, no magical bedding was complete without specific rituals to accompany it. Noble couples didn't merely lie down and hope for the best. They followed detailed instructions, often written down by royal physicians or astrologers. Picture a noblewoman pacing anxiously by candlelight, following precise steps outlined on an ancient scroll. Steps like circling the bed thrice while chanting certain phrases, or washing her hands in water, blessed under a full moon, before even climbing into bed. Her husband, meanwhile, might have been instructed to wear garments sewn with red threads, red being a colour closely associated with passion and life force. Certain royal households even held ceremonies before bed. The couple might participate in a small procession through their palace, attended by a retinue of servants carrying candles or incense. The entire palace was aware that tonight was the night meant to create an air. Privacy, it seemed, wasn't part of royal privilege. Imagine a grand yet awkward march toward the bedchamber, complete with priests reciting prayers and astrologers muttering spells. Of course, there were stranger customs still. Some royal houses believed that if conception remained elusive, supernatural intervention was required. This might involve spending nights sleeping in temples or near shrines dedicated to fertility gods. Other times, a king might be urged to spend a solitary night on a mountain under the stars, praying for divine favor, while the queen remained in the palace, anxiously waiting his return. These rituals showed how seriously and desperately royal families took the matter of heirs. Then again, not every fertility ritual was strictly spiritual. Some were oddly practical yet equally peculiar. For example, if a queen struggled to conceive, royal physicians might suggest the couple spend nights separated entirely, reuniting only on the night predicted as most auspicious astrologically. It wasn't about affection, it was about the perfect alignment of stars, planets, and lunar phases. So ironically, the royal couples most desperate for heirs often spent the least time together. Still, despite all the bizarre rituals, odd practices, and eccentric beliefs, the anxiety remained. Beneath all the embroidered sheets, mystic herbs, croaking frogs, and midnight processions lay a very human fear. Fear of a dynasty ending, fear of disappointment, and fear of Rythir. These noble bedrooms, richly adorned and infused with magic, were often places of quiet stress and whispered prayers, as much as any passionate embrace. So, as you linger for a moment longer in this strange magical bedchamber, surrounded by enchanted sheets, curious charms, and the faintest scent of garlic, remember that royals, for all their grandeur, shared many of the same anxieties and hopes as anyone else. They simply handled it in the most elaborate and bizarre ways imaginable. And who knows, maybe there's some small comfort in knowing that no matter how strange your family's advice might seem, at least nobody is suggesting you keep frogs under your mattress. You move quietly from the glow of that anxious royal bedchamber into another world entirely. A banquet hall alive with laughter, clinking goblets, and the hypnotic shimmer of candlelight. Here, beneath towering ceilings and enormous paintings of long-dead ancestors, noble families gather for an occasion you wouldn't expect, a fertility feast. This isn't your average medieval dinner. Every single course, every roasted pheasant, every sticky, honey-drenched pastry, every mysterious pie is carefully chosen, not just to impress, but to work its own strange magic on the wombs and loins of those present. Welcome to the noble art of eating your way to an heir. The practice of fertility feasts goes back further than most royal lineages themselves. It's rooted in the very oldest human logic. If what you eat can make you strong or sick, can't it also make you fertile? And, like everything else in the noble world, the answer wasn't simply yes or no. It was complicated, extravagant, and quite often extremely weird. At the center of these feasts would often sit the queen, or lady of the house, conspicuously served the most potent dishes first. One such dish, the much fabled fertility pie. Recipes for these pies changed over centuries in countries, but the concept remained. Imagine a steaming pastry, its flaky crust decorated with intricate shapes, stars, moons, rabbits, and all sorts of other fertile symbols. You can almost smell the cinnamon and rosewater, but the filling is the real secret. Depending on the region, it might contain pomegranate seeds for their bright seed-like promise, roasted heir again, those rabbits, or even ground up pearls. Yes, actual pearls, believed to contain the essence of purity and fertility. You're probably picturing someone breaking a tooth on their lucky pie, but hey, royal dentists had to earn their keep somehow. The banquets themselves were grand spectacles, sometimes lasting days. Platters overflowed with figs, dates and honeyed nuts, all foods linked to fertility in some ancient text or another. The superstitious would avoid apples. One too many stories about forbidden fruit and disastrous consequences for lineage. Instead, you'd see noble women biting into pears, symbolizing the feminine form, or gorging on grapes, for abundance and fruitful harvests, while noblemen raised cups of spiced wine, convinced each toast brought them closer to the dream of a healthy heir. Of course, there was always someone who went a bit overboard. Imagine the court jester slinking around with a string of sausages, insisting that more was definitely better. Let's not forget the truly bizarre ingredients. In some courts, fertility banquets included dishes spiced with dried beetles, believed to awaken dormant energies in the body. In Renaissance France, one celebrated noblewoman swore by a soup made from boiled rooster combs and sheep testicles, seasoned with herbs and a heavy dash of hope. She claimed it worked wonders, though history does not record how enthusiastically her kitchen staff greeted these requests. You might chuckle, but honestly, after your fourth bowl of magic beetle stew, the line between science and superstition starts to blur. Even drinks were chosen with a careful eye to their powers. Sweet mead flavored with rose petals or saffron was a favorite, both ingredients considered powerful aphrodisiacs and linked for better or worse to fertility across cultures. Sometimes the queen would be handed a glass of wine into which a rare gemstone had been briefly dipped, supposedly to infuse her with the stone's energies. Emeralds, again, made frequent appearances, but so did sapphires, thought to cool a woman's temperament and prepare her body for motherhood. Whether anyone worried about swallowing a stray jewel isn't recorded, but if you hear the clink of something hard in your next cup, maybe give it a pass. Music was essential at these feasts, and not just for entertainment. Certain songs and rhythms were believed to encourage the right mood for conception. Drummers beat slow, steady patterns, imitating the heartbeat of life itself, while flutists played soft, lilting tunes meant to soothe the womb and promote harmony between body and soul. If you're imagining a medieval version of a spa playlist, you're not far off. Though knowing noble courts, the atmosphere could swing rapidly from dignified tranquility to a tipsy, not-so-subtle encouragement for couples to excuse themselves and get on with it. Feasts weren't just for the body, they targeted the mind and spirit too. Between courses, noble guests listened to stories and poetry celebrating fertility, love and legendary births. The tales were grand, exaggerated, and just a little bit embarrassing for the couple of honor. Picture the court poet, standing up to recite a racy epic about Zeus and his endless parade of children, while the queen tries to look gracious and her husband nervously sips his mead. Even the most solemn feasts had their moments of uncomfortable humor. Some of the strangest fertility feasts involved the entire noble household, from the highest-ranking guest down to the humblest kitchen maid. Everyone had their role to play. The head cook might secretly slip lucky herbs into the dough, muttering charms as she kneaded the bread. Serving girls wove little sprigs of rosemary into their hair, not just for fragrance, but because rosemary, according to tradition, kept away evil spirits that might sabotage a pregnancy. Meanwhile, the butler entrusted with the wine would tap each cask 3 times for good fortune before pouring. Occasionally, the feast took on a competitive edge. Dishes would be shaped or arranged in suggestive ways, with subtle contests to see whose plate had the luckiest pattern. If you were the guest who discovered a coin baked into your bread, you were expected to make a raucous toast to future heirs, preferably before biting down and breaking a molar. One can only imagine the dental bills and the secret dread of each guest as they eyed their food with a mixture of hope and apprehension. It wasn't all laughs, though. Beneath the music and merriment, there was a very real anxiety simmering. If the noble woman failed to conceive after a particularly elaborate feast, it wasn't unusual for her to take the blame upon herself. The pressure could be suffocating. After all, in these times, a barren queen risked more than just gossip. She could be sent away, or worse, see her marriage dissolved for lack of an heir. You can almost feel the tension in the air as the musicians play a little louder, trying to drown out the whispers. Still, hope dies hard. The feasts grew more elaborate, the recipes stranger. In certain corners of Europe, noble families took to sending leftovers from the feast to their favorite monks or nuns, hoping a prayerful blessing would boost the magic of the meal. Occasionally, a dish would be left overnight in a chapel. Imagine a custard pie keeping vigil beside a saint's reliquary before being served at breakfast to the would-be mother. Even the crumbs had their uses. In Hungary, noble women sometimes scattered them around the house, convinced that even a mouse nibbling on fertility pie might bring luck to the family. Just try explaining that to the cleaning staff. And let's not forget the most public part of these fertility feasts, the ceremonial first bite. All eyes turned to the noble woman as she lifted her spoon or fork, every face hoping and a few silently betting that this meal would do the trick. Sometimes, an elderly matron considered the luckiest woman in the family, often because she'd produced an impressive number of offspring, would feed the queen the first morsel by hand, passing on a little bit of her power along with the food. You might wince at the awkwardness, but for the nobles, it was deadly serious. Of course, the most potent ingredient was hope. These feasts, as bizarre as they were, reflected a deep collective longing for children, for legacy, for the continuation of the family name, for all their oddness, pearls in pies, beetles in broth. A choir of hopeful toasts. There's something touching about people coming together, year after year, to share food, stories, and dreams of the future. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of that hope worked its magic, whether or not the science was sound. You slip away from the banquet table, the music and laughter fading behind you. Somewhere a queen sits quietly, hand on her belly, wondering if tonight will be the night she feels a tiny kick of life. The fire crackles on, and the candles burn low, and the promise of tomorrow glimmers, soft and golden in the heart of every noble house. You slip out of the grand hall and into the garden, where the air grows cool and scented with jasmine, dew clings to your sleeves, and the world feels quieter, more secret. Noble palaces come alive at night, but not always with banquets or the bright laughter of feasting. Sometimes, beneath the careful gaze of the moon, noble women move like wraiths through their own estates, tiptoeing past heavy doors, past marble statues and sleeping guards, out into groves or hidden courtyards. Here, under starlit shadows, a stranger kind of ritual begins, one that's equal parts wish, performance, and rebellion. The moonlit fertility dance. It always started with whispers. Tonight the moon is full. The midwife says, now is the best chance. Maybe the court astrologer has charted the stars and declared that this night is especially auspicious. A fleeting window of celestial alignment when anything is possible, even the impossible dream of a long-awaited heir. A few trusted ladies-in-waiting gather at the edges of the palace, carrying baskets of fragrant herbs and ribbons dyed the color of blood and wheat. Somewhere, an old midwife limps quietly along, clutching her bundle of charms and her book of secret verses. You slip into their midst, unseen, and suddenly, everything is hushed. The only sound is the wind stirring the branches overhead, and the quiet shuffle of slippers on mossy stones. Tonight's ritual is not for the eyes of men, or even for the servants. It is for the women who bear the weight of dynasties, who know that the world's expectations rest silently, heavily, in their bellies. The moon is a silent accomplice. Its pale light is believed to awaken the hidden rhythms of the female body, to stir something ancient and wild in the blood. At the heart of the ritual is the dance itself, a slow circling, always sunwise, clockwise, moving around a central tree, fountain, or even a makeshift altar of stones. Sometimes the women sing as they move, voices blending softly, carrying old melodies no one remembers learning, songs older than any palace. Their hands trail the air, weaving shapes that are half prayer, half invocation, like the sign of infinity or the spiral of a snail shell. The dance is full of symbols, each step and turn mapped out by generations of midwives and priestesses. Some women tie ribbons around their waists, letting the ends drag along the grass to sweep up fertility from the earth. Others clutch sprigs of rosemary or marjoram, herbs long associated with feminine health and the safe passage of children into the world. At certain moments, a handful of barley or wheat is thrown into the air, an echo of the old pagan harvest rites, while prayers are whispered to ancient goddesses, their names spoken only on nights like these. Sometimes, a favoured amulet is passed from hand to hand, a little silver moon, a carved wooden heir, a tiny pouch filled with seeds and stones. Each woman breathes a wish into the charm before giving it to the next, a chain of hope stretching back through the generations. You can almost feel the pulse of longing running through the group, each woman's story unique, but all bound together by the same need, the same ancient fear of emptiness. And then comes the spell, rarely spoken above a whisper, and never quite the same twice. Sometimes it's a string of words in Latin or Greek or some older tongue nobody writes anymore. Sometimes it's a chant or a lullaby, sung so quietly you wonder if the moon can even hear it. The point is always the same: to draw down the moon's power, to ask for her blessing, and to trust that just this once, she will answer. Not every ritual is so gentle though. Some noble houses took things further, seeking out strange and sometimes unsettling practices borrowed from old village midwives or foreign lands. There are stories, part truth, part legend, of women bathing naked in moonlit streams to cleanse themselves of past misfortune, or anointing their bodies with oils pressed from poppy seeds or pomegranates, believed to awaken the dormant seed within. In certain Slavic courts, women reportedly traced runes on their bellies in blue dye, hoping to confuse jealous spirits or trick fate into granting them a child. Other rituals were more theatrical. In Renaissance Italy, for example, a noblewoman might commission an elaborate tableau, a living moon garden set up in a private orchard, complete with fountains, marble nymphs, and even actors dressed as mythic figures, all to impress upon the heavens her seriousness and devotion. The effort and the expense could be staggering, yet for a family desperate to secure its future, no price seemed too high. At the heart of all these rituals is a kind of delicate rebellion. The women move through these secret ceremonies not only for themselves, but as a way to reclaim a sliver of control in a world where so much is decided by men by birth, by chance. When a noble woman dances under the moon, she steps, if only for a moment, outside the rigid rules of court and into something wild and free. For that one night she is not just a vessel for her family's ambitions, she is a daughter of the moon, a bearer of ancient mysteries, a whisper in the dark. The results? Well, let's just say that science has always been a little behind when it comes to the power of hope, ritual, and sheer persistence. Sometimes the stories end in joy. A longed-for child is born, the household erupts in celebration, and the old midwife gets her promised seat by the fire. Sometimes the rituals fail, and the next month brings only disappointment, more whispered prayers, more secret dances. Yet, even in failure, there is comfort. To share the ritual, to dance and sing and hope together, is to remind yourself you are not alone. The moonlit garden becomes a sanctuary, a place where longing is not something to be ashamed of, but something to be honoured and cherished. And yes, there is humour, even here. Picture a circle of noble women, solemnly tying ribbons, when a stray cat decides to join the dance, leaping and twirling with wild abandon, knocking over the basket of barley and sending the whole group into quiet fits of laughter. Or the time a nervous young noblewoman, trying her first moonlit ritual, accidentally slips into the fountain, soaking her dress and emerging with a startled yelp and a sheepish grin. These moments of silliness, as much as the ancient words and careful movements, are a kind of magic in themselves. It isn't always easy, this life of quiet hopes and secret spells. The noble world can be cold and unforgiving, and the consequences of failure are sometimes harsh. Yet, in the softness of the night, with the moon shining down and the air full of shared breath and old songs, there is a stubborn, shining hope that refuses to die. Maybe that's the real magic, the ability to keep hoping, to keep trying, no matter how many times the moon waxes and wanes. As the night draws on, the women slowly drift apart, ribbons trailing in the grass, laughter and quiet tears mingling in the cool air. Somewhere, a candle flickers in a bedroom window, a sign that hope is not yet lost. You slip away with the group, heart full of old wishes and new dreams. As the first birds begin to sing and the sky turns pale with the promise of another day. Because in the world of noble houses, the dance never truly ends. There is always another night, another moon, another chance to believe that just maybe, this time, the magic will work. You step out of the silver glow of the moonlit courtyard and slip into the quieter, darker corners of the palace. The hidden passages, the chilly stone stairways, the servants' halls lined with tapestries that muffle every sound. In these places, a different kind of hope flickers, the world of potions, brews, and remedies. Here, you encounter not the spectacle of feasts or the mystery of moonlit dances, but the secret, practical work of women and their trusted healers, grinding, steeping, and mixing in search of that one elusive miracle. Tonight, you enter the shadowy domain of herbal potions and risky remedies, the strange, sometimes dangerous elixirs nobles trusted to turn yearning into reality. Here, you encounter not the spectacle of feasts or the mystery of moonlit dances, but the secret, practical work of women and their trusted healers, grinding, steeping, and mixing in search of that one elusive miracle. Tonight you enter the shadowy domain of herbal potions and risky remedies, the strange, sometimes dangerous elixirs nobles trusted to turn yearning into reality. The world of medieval and early modern medicine was a curious blend of wisdom and wishful thinking, and nowhere was this clearer than in the quest for children. Sometimes the most powerful women in Europe found themselves depending on the most questionable advice, often with a straight face and the hope that desperation could be transformed into destiny by the right mixture in a cup or bowl. Imagine the queen, wrapped in a fur-trimmed robe, sitting at her chamber window in the early hours, staring down at a tiny vial of green liquid. On the table, a folded paper packet, stained and wrinkled, marked with cryptic symbols, maybe a sprig of yarrow, a curl of mandrake root, the faintest hint of licorice or cinnamon. Maybe there's a book, bound in old leather and locked tight, its contents only revealed to those who paid the midwife's price or won the physician's trust. There's an air of both solemnity and risk. After all, to seek out potions is to admit need, and to admit need is to show a chink in the armor of royal confidence. The recipes themselves could be poetic or horrifying. In England, some noble women place their trust in mother's cordial, a syrupy drink brewed from fennel seeds, sweet anise and honey, designed to open the womb and quicken the blood. In Italy, apothecaries blended tonics of saffron, rosewater, and ground-up pearls, again those pearls, to stir up the body's hidden energies. Sometimes the most sought-after ingredient was Spanish fly, a beetle crushed and mixed into wine, its dangerous toxins said to inflame desire and stoke the fire of life itself. It almost goes without saying, the side effects could be spectacularly unpleasant, a little light romance, followed by a trip to the royal physician. Of course, herbal wisdom wasn't always so reckless. Across Europe, women turned to plants long associated with fertility: mugwort, believed to warm the womb and drive away chill; pennyroyal, cautiously used in the hope of balancing cycles and clearing blockages; marjoram for strength and calm. Some recipes called for roots dug up at midnight, washed in moonlight, and hung to dry above the hearth. Others insisted the herbs be gathered by a virgin, or by a woman who had herself successfully birthed many children, as if luck could be transferred through the very act of picking leaves. The more superstitious the household, the more elaborate the preparation. The queen might be expected to drink her potion at a specific hour, just before dawn when the world is neither night nor day, or while standing on bare earth in the palace garden, or after reciting a certain prayer or poem. Some swore that for a potion to work, it had to be drunk in silence, with nobody else present, under the gaze of Venus in the eastern sky. Imagine the tension, a would-be mother, alone in the half-dark, clutching a cup that smells like sweet hay and bitter roots, swallowing her hope in one brave gulp. It wasn't just women who were prescribed these odd concoctions. Kings and noblemen too were plied with tonics designed to increase the humours or stir up the seed. Think ground stag's antlers boiled in wine, or eggs poached in goat's milk with a pinch of nutmeg. One popular English remedy called for a broth made from pigeon hearts, simmered with sage and parsley, then strained and sipped just before retiring to the royal bed. If you can imagine a king choking down pigeon heart soup by candlelight, well, perhaps that's why so many preferred the charms and dances. Not every potion was meant to be swallowed. Some were smeared or sprinkled, oils anointed on bellies, pastes dabbed on wrists, powders mixed with wax and burned in little pots beneath the bed. One notorious French midwife instructed noble women to rub their feet with a blend of thyme and rabbit's fat, while reciting the names of saints. Supposedly, the spell would travel upward, working its magic as the woman slept. No word on what happened if you accidentally woke up and licked your foot. There were, of course, hazards. Many of the most powerful ingredients bordered on poison, and the difference between a fertility charm and a dangerous drug was sometimes measured in grains or drops. Pennyroyal, for instance, could stimulate the womb, but in higher doses was famously toxic, even mandrake root, so beloved for its human shape and supposed magic, could cause hallucinations, convulsions, or worse. You'd have to trust your midwife implicitly and hope she liked you. And here's a little historical joke. In some houses, the midwife was so busy making fertility brews for her noble clients that she ended up with a booming sideline in selling hangover cures. After all, if the potion didn't help you conceive, at least you'd need something for the headache the next morning. The role of the royal apothecary or wise woman was both coveted and feared. She was part healer, part confidant, part scapegoat. If a queen conceived, the potion was praised. If she didn't, the ingredients were questioned, the method dissected, and sometimes the poor healer banished, or worse. Yet, for all the risk, these women were indispensable. They kept alive traditions passed down in secret, from mother to daughter, through centuries of change. Their knowledge, half magic and half science, was sometimes the only comfort in a world full of uncertainty. Noble households collected their own secret books of recipes, bound in velvet and tucked away from prying eyes. These grimoires listed every remedy, from the simplest milk posset to the most elaborate potions requiring ingredients imported from across continents. Powdered amber from the Baltic, gum mastic from the Levant, frankincense from distant deserts. The language of these recipes was often coded, filled with symbols and double meanings, so only the trusted could decipher them. You might find a recipe for elixir of dawn, calling for nothing more than dew gathered before sunrise on Midsummer's Day. Good luck collecting that before your coffee. Occasionally, potions became a matter of fashion. Suddenly, every court lady was drinking rose petal cordial, or dabbing a new oil behind her ears, convinced it was the key to success. There was a certain peer pressure. If the Queen's sister's cousin had a baby after drinking mugwort tea, you'd better believe everyone else was lining up for their own cup, even if it tasted like old socks. Sometimes, this led to a run on the local apothecary's shelves. In 17th century Paris, the sudden popularity of saffron for fertility caused its price to skyrocket. You can almost hear the complaints of cooks everywhere. How's anyone supposed to make a decent bouillabaisse if all the saffron's gone for other purposes? And in the world of courtly gossip, nothing was off limits. If a princess started looking a little too tired, or a countess appeared particularly radiant, the whispers would fly. She must be trying the new remedy. Or did you see the midwife carrying a bundle of fresh mint? Sometimes the talk grew darker. If a noblewoman suffered a miscarriage or illness, jealous rivals might hint that she had tried something too strong, or had offended the spirits with the wrong ingredient. In this way, even the gentlest herbs could become weapons in the court's unending game of suspicion and intrigue. Yet beneath the games and rivalries, the sharing of remedies was also a form of kindness. a way for women to reach out to each other across barriers of status and pride. The old countess offering her favourite recipe to a nervous young duchess, the chambermaid slipping a handful of marjoram to her mistress with a shy smile, the midwife teaching her secrets to a daughter who might one day serve a queen. In these small exchanges, a hidden world of solidarity grew, quiet but resilient. You linger for a moment watching a noblewoman carefully measure powder into her tea, her hand steady despite the pounding of her heart. She drinks, eyes closed, lips moving in a silent prayer. For a brief instant, you see her not as a queen or countess, but as just another person hoping against the odds for a little bit of everyday magic. And then, just like that, the moment passes. The apothecary's cupboards close, the fire in the hearth dies down, and the world of risky remedies disappears once more into the shadows, waiting for the next night, the next hopeful heart, the next chance for a miracle. You leave the hush of the apothecary's workshop behind, climbing a spiral stair lit by a sliver of dawn. This palace is never truly quiet. Servants murmur behind closed doors. Somewhere a rooster crows. But now, in these early hours, another dimension of the noble pursuit of heirs stirs awake. Not the world of herbs and brews, but a landscape lined with relics, icons, and whispered prayers. Here, you enter the odd, luminous world of the bizarre saints, where holy bones and sacred objects, sometimes charming, sometimes unsettling, become powerful tools in the royal quest for fertility. It begins, as so much does, with hope and a little superstition. You find yourself in a cool, dim chapel, the walls covered with velvet drapery and intricate carvings. Candles flicker before statues that watch you with serene, ageless faces. All around you, the air is heavy with incense and a quiet urgency. The king and queen kneel at the altar, heads bowed, lips moving. They have come seeking a blessing, not from any ordinary saint, but from those whose stories border on the magical, the saints whose miracles are known to bend the laws of nature itself. Throughout the Middle Ages and Renaissance, certain saints gained fame for their supposed ability to intervene in matters of love, childbirth, and, most pressingly, fertility. Each region had its favourites. In France, Saint Anne, the mother of Mary herself, was the go-to intercessor for childless noble women. In Italy, Saint Rita of Coscia was rumoured to hear the pleas of those facing impossible odds. In Spain, Saint Raymond Nonatus, who was said to have been delivered from his mother's womb by caesarean after her death, became the patron of safe births and desperate prayers. But some saints were, to put it mildly, a little more eccentric. Take Saint Margaret of Antioch, for example. She was believed to have survived being swallowed by a dragon, only to burst out of its belly unharmed. In noble households from England to Germany, her image was sewn onto birthing gowns or carved into amulets, and slipped beneath the pillow of a would-be mother. The thinking went, if Saint Margaret could escape a dragon's stomach, surely she could help a baby escape the womb. And if you think that's odd, just wait for the patron saints of toothaches and lost keys. In some palaces, these saints' relics were treated like magical objects. Vials of oil supposedly touched to Saint Anne's tomb, tiny slivers of bone, or a scrap of linen believed to have belonged to a long-dead holy woman. All were considered powerful. Imagine a queen, dressed in her richest gown, processing solemnly to the chapel, while a priest bears a golden reliquary at the head of the line. The relic is placed on her lap, or brushed across her brow, as the choir hums softly in the background. Every eye in the palace watches, every heart hopes that tonight the heavens are listening. The rituals could get elaborate. In Hungary, it was said that barren noble women should sleep with a carved image of Saint Elizabeth under their pillows for 9 nights, then bring it to church and offer it up during Mass. In Russia, hopeful mothers traveled to remote monasteries, leaving a lock of their hair or a scrap of embroidered cloth as a plea for intervention. Sometimes, these offerings took on a competitive tone, whose gift would win the saint's favour, who could leave the most intricate handkerchief or the richest jewel. And of course, where there are relics, there are rumours. Some claimed that merely brushing the lips with a certain relic could open the womb. Others whispered about relics that had failed, blaming rivals or unseen enemies for spoiling the magic. Occasionally, The relic itself became a symbol of power and prestige. To possess a piece of St. Margaret's cloak was to advertise not just faith but the wealth and connections needed to obtain such a rare treasure. Not all the saints were officially recognized by the church. Local legends produced their own crop of miracle workers. In Brittany, women sought the help of Saint Nitouche, who was rumoured to grant children to those who bathed a statue of her in milk. In the Pyrenees, Saint Ganfol, a martyred greyhound no less, was invoked for both healthy babies and safe deliveries. Pilgrims left ribbons and dog biscuits at his shrine, hoping the good dog spirit would guard their families. Yes, even a four-legged saint could find a place in the tapestry of noble hopes. It wasn't all solemnity. Sometimes, a little humour crept in, even among the pious. Picture a gaggle of noble women standing before a shrine, nervously giggling as they compare the magic relics hidden in their pockets, a splinter from St. Anne's chair, a feather from the pillow of St. Colette, or a scrap of cloth that may or may not have been touched to the tunic of St. Anthony. "I'll trade you my bone fragment for 2 drops of holy oil," one might whisper, but only if you promise not to tell the abbess. These sacred objects didn't only live in chapels or locked chests. Sometimes they were carried everywhere. A cameo hung around the neck, a ring inscribed with the name of a patron saint, or a tiny relic pouch sewn into the hem of a gown. There's even a story from the English court of a duchess who wore a miniature reliquary as a brooch, quietly tapping it 3 times before sitting down at each meal. Maybe she was hoping for a miracle in the kitchen too. Meanwhile, the clergy and palace priests played their part with relish. Some became expert showmen, orchestrating grand ceremonies to display relics and encourage donations. After all, the care and maintenance of holy objects didn't come cheap. Others took a more personal approach, promising secret prayers, special blessings, or the loan of a particularly powerful relic just for one night. You can imagine the politics: which family would be first in line, which would wait nervously in the chapel, which would bribe the sexton for an early appointment. Yet, for all the pageantry and secret bargaining, the deeper truth was simple. To seek the help of a saint was to acknowledge vulnerability, to admit that even the highest born needed a little magic. For every miracle story whispered in a darkened pew, there were dozens of unspoken fears. The dread of childlessness, the sorrow of loss, the weight of family expectation. The saints, bizarre as some of them were, offered comfort. They were a reminder that hope could be tangible, held in the hand, touched to the lips, or tucked beneath a pillow. Sometimes the rituals backfired. A relic borrowed from a neighbouring duchy failed to deliver results, and tongues wagged about whether it was cursed or perhaps just too tired from overuse. Rivalries sprang up as noble women compared the success rates of their personal saints. One can almost hear the court gossip. Lady Matilda swears by St. Rita, but Lady Eleanor says, only St. Margaret will do, and as for the Dowager Countess, well, she's hedging her bets with both. The passing of relics and the veneration of odd saints even found its way into the next generation. Children were christened with the names of favourite miracle workers, and family chapels grew crowded with statues and painted icons. Sometimes a young noblewoman would inherit her mother's favourite relic, along with a little whispered advice about when to use it. Only on a waxing moon, my dear, and never let it touch salt. Even the men, so often kept at a dignified distance from these rituals, occasionally got in on the act. A nervous duke might slip a relic into his doublet or donate a heavy purse to a shrine, just in case. Kings were not immune either. There's a story of one ruler who, frustrated by years of childlessness, had a gold reliquary embedded in the headboard of his marriage bed. Each night, he and his queen would touch it before sleep, hoping for a sign. You can imagine the royal carpenter's delight at that commission. The rituals themselves could be a spectacle. Processions wound through castle courtyards, with nobles bearing relics on silk cushions, attended by chanting monks and clusters of curious children. Bells rang, incense billowed, and prayers rose skyward. Afterward, the relic was carried back inside, carefully stored away, while the noble families waited, holding their breath for the faintest sign, a missed cycle, a sudden craving, a whispered rumour. Of course, not every noble believed in the power of saints and relics. Some regarded it all as theatre, a comfort for the anxious and the unlucky. But even the skeptics found themselves drawn in, if only for the sake of tradition or to satisfy the demands of a worried spouse. After all, when the stakes are this high, when the fate of a dynasty hangs in the balance, why not try every tool, however bizarre? You linger one last time in the shadowy chapel, watching as a noble woman gently presses her lips to a glass vial, eyes shining with hope. All around you, the walls are lined with centuries of prayers, each one a silent testimony to the strange, beautiful persistence of belief. The saints, strange, miraculous, and just a bit peculiar, watch over it all, their faces kind and inscrutable, holding the secrets of generations in the quiet hush before sunrise. The morning sun slants through diamond-paned windows as you drift from the solemn hush of the chapel to the more intimate, often comical, arena of the noble bedchamber. Here, in the half-light and muffled quiet, a fresh set of anxieties and superstitions stirs to life. Tonight you find yourself at the heart of the noble world's most private and peculiar customs, the bedsheet superstitions and strange beliefs that clung to every royal attempt at conception. If you ever thought your family's traditions around socks and salt were a bit much, just wait. These folks took superstition to a whole new level. Tonight, you find yourself at the heart of the noble world's most private and peculiar customs, the bedsheet superstitions and strange beliefs that clung to every royal attempt at conception. If you ever thought your family's traditions around socks and salt were a bit much, just wait. These folks took superstition to a whole new level. For the nobles, the act of conception was not a simple private affair. It was a matter of national importance, family honor, and sometimes even political survival. Naturally, this meant that every detail, from the hour to the color of the sheets, was carefully scrutinized, fussed over, and occasionally blamed for failures. And so, an entire subculture of bedroom rituals blossomed, a patchwork quilt of charms, odd rules, and semi-secret tricks that passed from generation to generation. First, there was the bedsheet itself, a mundane object transformed into a kind of magical shield or even a participant in the ritual. Noble women were often instructed to sleep only on linen woven during a waxing moon, or on fabric spun by a woman who had herself birthed many healthy children. Sometimes these fertility sheets were carefully embroidered with symbols, winding vines for growth, pomegranates for abundance, or more curiously, little frogs and rabbits for their legendary procreative powers. It wasn't unusual for the sheets to be anointed with rosewater or sprinkled with dried petals, as if every sense needed to be awakened and every spirit appeased. There were rules about color too. White was usually considered best, the symbol of purity and new beginnings. But in some parts of Italy, green sheets were favored to invite spring into the bed, and thus the blossoming of new life. Red embroidery, again, was a favorite, for passion, vitality, and the hope that bloodlines quite literally would continue unbroken. The belief in the power of textiles didn't stop at sheets. Noble women might be asked to don a special nightgown, one reserved only for attempts at conception, carefully laundered and stored with lavender or rosemary. In a particularly curious English tradition, women were told to sleep with a child's cap, borrowed from a particularly robust infant, tucked beneath their pillow. This, it was whispered, would encourage the spirits to see her as a mother already. And if you're picturing a slightly squashed bonnet poking through the goose feathers, you're not alone. Superstitions extended to the act itself. Some believed that conceiving during a thunderstorm was unlucky. Lightning, after all, could frighten away a delicate new soul. Others swore by the opposite, that storms brought energy and passion, and so were the very best time to try. The only thing everyone seemed to agree on was that silence was important. No arguing, no laughter, not even a stray cough. The tiniest disruption could supposedly offend the spirits or scare the child away. Timing was everything. In France, noble couples would consult calendars, sometimes inscribed with lucky and unlucky days, to find the precise moment for the great work. Astrologers were summoned to cast horoscopes and divine the most auspicious hours, right down to the minute. In one famous case, a Spanish princess was instructed to drink a cup of mint tea at precisely midnight, then enter the marital bed at 12 minutes past, because that was when Venus smiled on her house. It's enough to make you long for a good old-fashioned spontaneous romance. The very position of the bed mattered. In some palaces, beds were moved so their headboards faced east, greeting the sunrise and aligning with the direction of new life. If a string of failures plagued the royal house, the entire bed might be replaced. Sometimes with a borrowed lucky bed from a noble family famous for its many children. Imagine the logistics, moving an enormous four-poster through echoing stone corridors, all because Aunt Marguerite's sixth son was born on it. Sometimes, success was seen to hinge on the smallest, silliest things. A royal physician might recommend that the couple sleep with a loaf of bread beneath the bed to feed the little soul's journey, or that the wife wear a ring of silver wire on her smallest toe. Stories abounded of women who slept with a sprig of parsley tucked in their camise, or who refused to brush their hair for 3 days to confuse the spirits of barrenness. One German duchess, famous for her 10 sons, swore by the practice of hanging 7 keys from the bedpost. The keys, she insisted, would unlock the gates to heaven. If you suspect that a few of these traditions were invented by mothers-in-law simply to keep daughters-in-law busy, you wouldn't be alone. As the morning light grows, you notice the other oddities scattered throughout the room. There's a little wooden box tucked discreetly in a drawer. Inside perhaps is a conception stone, smooth and worn from generations of anxious rubbing. There's a feather, said to from a stork's nest, hidden behind a tapestry. In the corner sits a basin of water, blessed by the village priest, and every morning the would-be mother dips her fingers in it, before speaking a word to anyone. Some keep a tiny iron nail beneath the mattress, to pin the child's soul in place. In one Russian estate, a noblewoman was known to hang a tiny mirror from her window, reflecting the first rays of sunrise onto the bed, because mirrors, according to old tales, could catch wandering spirits and guide them where they were needed most. Not all of these rituals were performed with solemn faith. More than a few noble women kept up the traditions for show, just in case, but whispered jokes behind their hands about the silliest customs. Sometimes the laughter was a kind of comfort, a release from the pressure and fear that clung to every failed attempt. Picture a group of ladies in waiting, gathered around the fire, swapping stories of the most ridiculous things they'd been told to try. Parsley in your camise? Oh, you poor thing. My mother-in-law insisted on garlic. Well, at least it wasn't onions. I hear those are only for twins. The men, meanwhile, had their own odd superstitions though. Being men, they preferred to keep theirs wrapped in a veil of stoic dignity. A duke might secretly carry a pebble from his ancestral river in his boot, or refuse to shave until a child was conceived. In one case, a king famously wore the same lucky undershirt for months, until the palace laundress, unable to stand the smell, finally burned it. Legend has it that shortly thereafter, the queen discovered she was expecting coincidence. The laundress, for her part, took full credit. You'd think that all these rituals would become tiresome, but instead, they wove a strange, comforting routine. A sense that even when nature was fickle and fate seemed to turn its face away, there was still something you could do, even if it was only sleeping on green sheets, or dipping your fingers in holy water, or telling yourself that tonight, the stars would finally align. Still, beneath the jokes and camaraderie, a deeper current ran. Every morning the chambermaids would gather the sheets and check for the telltale stains that might signal success or failure. Every month the household held its breath, watching for signs, cravings, fatigue, a sudden aversion to certain foods. Sometimes hope bloomed. Sometimes it withered quietly away. In failure, the sheets and charms were blamed. In success, they were celebrated and passed on to sisters, daughters, or close friends. Stories grew in the telling. This nightgown brought the Duchess her first child. Someone would whisper, "Never mind that it's patched and faded, there's magic in the thread." And so the cycle continued, one generation after another, each clinging to its own special trick, its own lucky bedsheet, its own way of keeping hope alive. Yet, every so often, a new custom would emerge, born of desperation or invention. Perhaps it was a borrowed amulet from a foreign court, or a new herb recommended by a traveling healer. If a queen was especially beloved, her household might invent an entirely new superstition just for her. Walk 3 times backward around the bed before dawn, or place a bowl of milk on the windowsill and leave the door open for the spirit of fertility. The more absurd, the better, if only to keep fear at bay. Sometimes, despite all effort, nothing seemed to work. Then a noblewoman might lock her lucky bedsheets in a chest and refuse to look at them again, or burn her nightgown in a fit of tears. The chamber would be rearranged, the bed moved, the walls repainted. Hope, once so tangible, would become a fragile thing, a whisper, a prayer, a superstitious glance over the shoulder at sunset. But hope, as ever, was stubborn. The next month a new charm would appear, a new ritual would be whispered from mother to daughter, and the whole strange, hopeful dance would begin again. In this world of bedsheet superstitions and strange beliefs, there was always one more trick to try, one more story to tell, one more night to hope that finally the magic would hold. And as you step out into the corridor, the sound of laughter and whispered secrets fading behind you, you realize that, for all its oddness, this patchwork world of charms and customs was not so different from any other. At its heart, it was a world built on hope, a hope that endured no matter how many times the bedsheets were changed, the amulets were polished, or the candles burned low in the quiet night. You pass through the echoing corridors of the palace and into a new realm, a place where faith in science and faith in superstition intermingle with the sound of scribbling quills and the faint scent of medicinal herbs. It's here, behind polished wooden doors and shelves crowded with mysterious jars, that the noble family's most trusted confidant awaits, the court physician. In this chamber, knowledge, ritual, and hope collide in a tangle of dubious medical practices that shaped the fate of royal bloodlines. Tonight you find yourself observing the secretive world of court physicians and their strange, sometimes unsettling attempts to unlock the secret of fertility. The physician's study is a world apart. Rich velvet curtains keep out the morning glare. Candles flicker atop stacks of books, some ancient, filled with elaborate diagrams of the human body, others new, brimming with the latest theories from the universities of Paris or Padua. Silver trays gleam on a long table, bearing strange-looking instruments and vials of murky liquid. The walls are adorned with anatomical sketches, some rather hopeful in their optimism. If you ask the resident apothecary, a faint metallic tang hangs in the air, hinting at both science and sorcery. You'd expect these learned men to work only with reason, but the truth is that the line between knowledge and guesswork is dangerously thin, especially when it comes to royal fertility. The physician, dressed in a heavy robe, leans over a ledger, recording his observations in a spidery script. His patient, the anxious queen, sits across from him, hands folded in her lap, listening as he recites a list of recommendations that today might sound more like a game of charades than medicine. First come the examinations, often awkward, sometimes downright mortifying. The queen's pulse is measured, her tongue inspected, her skin pressed and prodded. She's asked about her appetite, her dreams, even her passing thoughts. Everything, the physician explains, is a potential clue. One school of thought says that too much black bile causes barrenness. Another blames a cold womb, a sluggish liver, or an overactive imagination. Sometimes the queen is even told to describe her husband's habits in embarrassing detail, as if fertility might hinge on the duke's preference for mutton over venison. The court physician isn't alone in his efforts. He is often flanked by an apothecary, a midwife, or even an astrologer, each eager to offer their particular expertise. The apothecary suggests a syrup of wild yam. The midwife insists on poultices and herbal compresses. The astrologer, meanwhile, consults his star charts, frowning at the conjunction of Mars and Saturn. You might suspect that the only thing more potent than these remedies is the queen's patience. One of the most persistent beliefs is the concept of balancing the humours. The body, so the theory goes, is governed by 4 humours: blood, phleg, black bile, and yellow bile, and imbalance leads to all sorts of trouble. For infertility, the preferred treatments can be startling. Bloodletting is a favourite, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, performed with great ceremony, using leeches or a small, very sharp knife. The queen submits with stoic resignation, though she may quietly wish the physician would bleed the king instead. If bloodletting doesn't work, the next prescription is often a series of hot and cold baths. One week the queen soaks in water infused with rosemary, cinnamon, and a handful of river pebbles. The next she's plunged into chilly springs at dawn. If she's lucky, The physician allows her a glass of warm wine afterward, with strict instructions to avoid sour apples, cold cheese, and melancholy thoughts. Then come the more creative interventions. Some physicians recommend wearing a poultice of mashed figs and barley, pressed against the belly with a silk sash. Others favour more dramatic remedies, drinking a potion made from the ground heart of a hare, or eating roasted sparrow, a bird famous for its amorous reputation. One notorious Spanish doctor was said to prescribe a blend of sheep's milk, honey, and powdered coral to be sipped each night while listening to lute music. He claimed it worked best when the lute was out of tune, perhaps to distract the patient from the taste. When all else fails, the court physician sometimes turns to more esoteric methods. He burns aromatic woods in the queen's chamber, juniper for purity, sandalwood for vitality, pine to awaken the sleeping spirit of the womb. He may instruct the king and queen to sleep apart for a month, then reunite at the precise moment the moon enters a favourable house in the sky. Occasionally, he recommends a ceremonial fast or a period of silence, during which even the servants tiptoe and whisper through the halls, as if too much noise might shatter the fragile chance of conception. Naturally, all of this is accompanied by a great deal of record keeping. Every temperature is noted, every mood swing documented. The Queen's menstrual cycles are charted with mathematical precision, sometimes with input from the court astronomer, just to be sure. When things go wrong, the records are pored over for clues. Perhaps we should have used rosemary, not marjoram. Maybe we fasted too long, or not long enough. It's not uncommon for these notes to be passed down through generations, each new physician eager to improve upon his predecessor's failures. The king, too, is subject to the physician's advice, though often with more resistance and far more complaint. He's told to eat fewer sweets, to exercise more, to avoid cold baths and long hours of hunting in the rain. Some doctors even recommend gentle leeching, a prescription that inspires dread in even the bravest of monarchs. In private, the king may grumble about the indignity, but publicly, he submits. After all, the future of the dynasty is at stake. Sometimes the court physician becomes the target of suspicion or even outright blame. If the queen fails to conceive, the whispers start. Perhaps the doctor is not as skilled as he claims. Rivals may bribe the physician for news, hoping to gain some political advantage. In a few cases, a failure to produce an heir has led to the abrupt dismissal, or worse, of the court's entire medical staff. The pressure is immense, and not just for the would-be parents. Yet for all the dubious remedies, the physician's presence is also a source of comfort. He listens patiently to the queen's fears, reassures the king, and offers hope when others can't. Sometimes, his remedies are little more than words of encouragement. A gentle hand on the shoulder, a promise that next month will be better. In the lonely world of noble fertility, this is perhaps the most potent medicine of all. And of course, there's room for humour. Behind closed doors, the physician and his assistant swap stories of their most absurd consultations. She swears she conceived after wearing rabbit fur slippers for a month, one might say, to peals of laughter. He refused to eat onions, lest his offspring smell of them. For every solemn ritual, there's a private joke, a way to keep despair at bay, if only for a moment. The queens and noble women, too, develop their own gallows humour. If this month fails, perhaps I'll try standing on my head, one jokes to her ladies-in-waiting. Another offers to compose a new song, the ballad of the most fertile leech. The laughter is quiet, but sincere, a small act of rebellion against a world that often reduces them to vessels and vessels alone. For all their quirks, the court physicians left a real legacy. Many of their remedies, though now laughable, were rooted in centuries of observation and experiment. They gathered knowledge from distant lands, traded letters with foreign scholars, and collected herbs from gardens that spanned half the world. They invented, they adapted, and they cared, sometimes with more hope than success, but always with a fierce determination to serve. In the end, the court physician's art was as much about ritual as science, as much about faith as fact. Each new prescription, each carefully measured dose, each whispered reassurance was an act of belief. Belief that even in a world ruled by chance, a little knowledge and a lot of hope might just tip the balance. As you leave the study, the physician bows his head over his ledgers, already preparing a new remedy, a new schedule, a new ritual. Outside, the palace begins to stir. Hope is alive for another day. And so, the search continues, fueled by science, superstition, and the quiet enduring wish that this month the miracle will finally arrive. From the world of physicians and their ink-stained ledgers, you wander now into a realm that is even more shrouded in whispers and steam, the bathhouse. At first glance, it's just a haven of warmth and relaxation, a place where the noble elite come to escape the drafty chill of their stone halls. But linger a little longer, and you discover another purpose simmering just beneath the surface here in the flickering candlelight and fragrant vapors. Noble women and their trusted companions perform some of the most secretive and peculiar fertility rituals of all. Bathhouses are as old as civilization itself, but in the noble world, they take on a near-sacred character. The marble floors are slick with aromatic oils, copper basins gleam in the filtered sunlight, and the air, thick with steam, seems to muffle the world's demands. It is in this half-hidden sanctuary that noble women shed not only their velvet gowns, but also the crushing expectations of court life. They gather, sometimes in pairs, sometimes in secretive groups, always in a hush of anticipation and hope. The rituals here are tactile, sensory, and often deeply personal. Water, after all, is the oldest symbol of renewal and birth. To step into a bath is to be born again, to wash away not only the dust and grime of daily life, but also sorrow, failure, and the stains of old disappointments. In noble houses, fertility baths are timed with almost obsessive precision. The new moon, the equinox, the night of a special feast. Sometimes it's the third Friday of the month, chosen for a reason known only to the midwife and the heavens. A noble woman's bath might begin with a blessing. A priestess or midwife murmurs prayers over the water, sometimes dipping a sprig of willow or rosemary in and stirring slowly, as if coaxing invisible spirits to awaken. The bathwater itself is a strange brew, never plain. It might be tinted blue with crushed violets, or scented with rose petals and thyme. Marigold is a favourite for hope, basil for luck, bay leaves for protection. If the woman is especially anxious, she might ask for valerian or chamomile to soothe the soul and quiet the mind. Then come the more esoteric additions. In some noble houses, a silver coin is tossed into the bath to attract prosperity and the attention of benevolent spirits. A scrap of white linen is floated on the surface to invite purity and new beginnings. One especially odd tradition calls for a drop of milk in the water, an offering to the gods of nourishment, or perhaps just a nod to the basics of biology. If you listen closely, you might hear the quiet clink of pearls. Yes, pearls again, being dropped into the bath to encourage the birth of something rare and precious. Once in the water, the women are in their element. They soak, they laugh, they share secrets, and more importantly, remedies. The bathhouse becomes a space of solidarity, where advice flows as freely as the water. Stories are exchanged. My cousin swears by rosemary and lavender. Try juniper and lemon peel. That's what worked for Lady Blanche. Recipes are shared, prayers are taught, and rumours are whispered about the latest miracle bath used by the Queen in the next kingdom over. For some, the bath is a solitary act. The noble woman sits quietly, her eyes closed, the steam curling around her. She recites private mantras or stares at her reflection in the rippling water, hoping for some sign, a flicker of light, a change in her own face, that this time things will be different. Others prefer company, surrounding themselves with sisters, aunts, or close friends, turning the bathhouse into a stage for group rituals. Together they sing old songs, weave flower garlands, or light floating candles, each tiny flame a wish set adrift on the water's surface. And, because no noble gathering is without its share of quirks, there are always a few customs that tip from the merely unusual to the downright bizarre. In one Slavic tradition, the women pour a thin stream of honey into the bath, believing that the sweetness will soften the heart of fate. In some parts of France, the midwife circles the tub 3 times while muttering an old rhyme, then sprinkles crushed eggshells around the rim to ward off barren spirits. There's even a tale of a noble woman who insisted on bathing with a live frog in a separate bowl, to be fair, because frogs, being prolific breeders, were considered the ultimate fertility charm. If you ever wondered where spa trends get their inspiration, Look no further. Occasionally, the bathhouse is the setting for more serious rituals. A woman struggling with repeated loss or disappointment might undergo a purification bath, led by the household priestess. She is stripped of all jewelry, even her wedding ring, and enters the water holding only a plain wooden staff. As the staff floats beside her, she is told to imagine her troubles washing away, dissolving in the warmth. Sometimes she is gently anointed with oils, almond for comfort, myrrh for healing, and wrapped in linen upon emerging, as if she is a newborn herself. The rituals do not end with the bath. When the water has cooled and the candles gutter low, there are still customs to observe. Some women save a few drops of their bath water and pour it onto the roots of a fruit tree to encourage fruitful growth. Others keep a single rose petal pressed in a locket, a secret token of hope. And there's always the matter of timing. Once dried and dressed, the noble woman is sometimes instructed to avoid speaking to anyone except her husband until dawn, a rule that inspires many a suppressed giggle and more than one hastily scrawled note left on a pillow. Of course, men are not entirely absent from this watery world. Some noblemen, particularly those desperate for an heir, are invited or cajoled into their own version of the fertility bath. Their rituals are simpler but no less peculiar, bathing in water that has been blessed by fire, warmed over a sacred flame, or soaking with iron nails and sprigs of hawthorn to strengthen the blood. One German count was known for insisting on a weekly plunge in a tub filled with melted snow, convinced it would shock his seed awake. The servants, one imagines, did not envy him in winter, and inevitably the bathhouse has its share of mishaps and laughter. Candles topple into the tub, sending everyone into a panic. The resident cat sneaks in, only to fall spectacularly into a basin and emerge, yowling, in a cloud of rose petals. Ribbons meant to symbolize hope are accidentally knotted so tightly that it takes half an hour to untangle them. The midwife, unable to keep a straight face, accidentally drops her bundle of dried herbs and spends the next quarter hour fishing soggy thyme leaves out of the drain. Yet, for all the laughter and spilled honey, there is a deep sense of connection. The bathhouse, unlike the court or the chapel, is a place where women and sometimes men can drop their masks. It is a sanctuary where they are free to admit longing, to mourn disappointment, and to share dreams. Here everyone is equal in their hope, their anxiety and their desire for a miracle. As the morning wanes, the bathhouse quiets. The last candles burn low, the herbs are gathered, and the pools are left to cool. Noble women emerge, skin flushed, eyes bright or pensive. They tie their hair back, don their gowns, and prepare to re-enter the palace. Their burdens, at least for a little while, washed away. And just before the door closes, you catch one last glimpse. A line of women pausing, hands clasped, heads bowed, each carrying away a tiny, invisible spark of hope. In a world where so much is out of their control, these secret rituals performed in the warm embrace of water and sisterhood are a stubborn, beautiful act of faith. You step back into the halls of the palace, a faint trace of lavender and laughter clinging to your clothes, and realize that the path to a royal heir is never a straight line. It winds through shadows and steam, through superstition and science, always returning, no matter how strange the ritual or how long the wait, to the same simple truth: hope floats. The bathhouse air lingers on your skin as you follow the winding corridors back into the grand salons of the palace, a world where tapestries shimmer with golden threads, and carved wooden beasts leer down from the beams. Here, as you pass through columns and shadowed alcoves, another odd element of noble fertility comes into focus. This is the domain of animal magic, the belief that certain creatures, real, imagined, or somewhere in between, hold the secret to blessing a bloodline with heirs. You might think it's all about storks and rabbits, but for noble families, the animal kingdom was an encyclopedia of omens, symbols, and outright magical thinking. At the heart of this menagerie were two powerful drives: the desire to imitate nature's greatest breeders, and the urge to control fate by whatever means possible, however peculiar. If you've ever seen a coat of arms with a suspiciously fertile-looking rabbit, or a dragon wrapped protectively around a shield, you're already catching on. In the everyday life of the castle, animals were everywhere. Dogs lounged by the hearth, horses stamped in the courtyards, hawks perched in the mews. But some creatures were more than mere pets or livestock. They were woven into the fabric of fertility rituals, consulted as oracles, or invoked in moments of desperation. The stories start quietly. A noble woman slips a frog-shaped amulet under her pillow, or a lord drinks a broth made from rooster's comb and swears he feels the vigor of the hunt. By dawn, the tales have grown: a white mare's tail tied to the bedpost, a turtle shell hidden beneath the floorboards, a black cat adopted and fed cream in the moonlight. Let's begin with the rabbit, a true celebrity in the fertility folklore of Europe. With their legendary speed of reproduction, rabbits hopped straight into noble households as both pets and symbols. Some ladies kept gentle lap bunnies, believing that stroking their soft fur would call forth the same prolific energy. The imagery crept into tapestries and embroidery, with rabbits frolicking among vines and children. In certain regions, the pelt of a particularly lucky rabbit might be sewn into the lining of a noblewoman's gown or made into a little pouch to wear around her neck. The running joke, of course, was that the only thing multiplying faster than the rabbits were the superstitions themselves. Frogs held a special place too, associated with rain, rebirth and transformation. Frogs were seen as mystical mediators between worlds. Midwives sometimes recommended keeping a live frog in a small box beneath the bed, or less appealingly, sprinkling water from a frog's pond onto the doorstep before bedtime. In France, it was rumoured that kissing a frog before sleep, with apologies to the frog, would guarantee conception. You can only imagine the scene: a line of hopeful duchesses in nightgowns, croaking softly to their new lucky charms, while the palace cat looks on in bemusement. Then there were the birds, which fluttered in and out of noble fertility lore like omens on the wing. Sparrows, renowned for their amorous natures, were often invoked in love potions and bedroom art. The sight of a nesting swallow beneath the palace eaves was greeted with joy, a sign that the house itself was fertile, blessed by the natural world. Even the mundane chicken played a role. Eggs were symbols of birth and possibility, and the presence of a healthy flock was taken as a good omen. In some households, the first egg laid after Easter was carefully saved and buried in the garden to encourage fruitful soil and fruitful wombs. On the grander end of the spectrum, you find the horse. Horses represented strength, power and continuity, qualities prized in any noble line. There's a tale from medieval Poland of a princess who was urged to spend an hour each dawn sitting quietly beside her family's prized broodmare. The idea being that fertility flows from the strong to the hopeful. Knights too sometimes carried horsehair charms into battle, or tucked them under their pillows before a night of royal duty. And if you ever wondered why so many ancient lullabies mention rocking horses or little ponies, now you know. People were hoping their children would inherit the resilience of the herd. Then there's the turtle, slow but steady, living for decades and laying scores of eggs each year. In parts of Italy and Spain, a noble woman might keep a tiny carved tortoise in her jewelry box, or sew a turtle-shaped button onto her underclothes. The message? Endurance, longevity, and a hope that the next child would arrive in due season. As for the men, some carried tortoise-shell combs, swearing that running them through their hair strengthened the family roots. Sometimes, animals were invoked not for their numbers, but their mystical properties. The unicorn, yes, the unicorn, was prized as a symbol of purity and magical potency. A cup made from unicorn horn, usually narwhal tusk, might be used in rituals. The liquid inside believed to cleanse the body of toxins and open the path to conception. The nobleman who could afford such a relic would serve drinks from it on the most important nights, just in case a little extra magic was needed. One suspects the only thing multiplying was the merchant's profits, but who's counting? It wasn't only objects or symbols. Sometimes the rituals became performances. A noblewoman might walk through her garden at sunrise, accompanied by a white goat, to absorb its gentle nature and fertility. Others kept a fish pond. Its surface watched for omens, bubbles, ripples, or the sudden leap of a golden carp meant good fortune was on its way. There were even stories of nobles releasing a cage of doves at the full moon, each bird representing a wish or a prayer for a child. Inevitably, these practices sparked plenty of palace humour. You'd hear ladies-in-waiting swap tales, Lady Beatrice won't sleep unless her pet hedgehog is under the bed, or the Countess swears she conceived after stroking her husband's falcon, though she won't say whether the falcon was in the room at the time. Even the servants got in on the act, placing little clay mice near the nursery to encourage a lively household. If you thought the noble world was all solemn faces and heavy crowns, you'd be surprised by how much laughter, genuine, nervous, or a bit wicked, accompanied these animal rituals. The influence of animal lore extended into noble art and architecture. Frescoes and tapestries displayed not just scenes of hunting and feasting, but clever fertility motifs. A stag and doe facing each other beneath a flowering tree, a pair of hares tangled in ivy, or a peacock with its glorious tail, a symbol of beauty and renewal. Sometimes these images were obvious, sometimes tucked away in borders or hidden behind curtains, as if the very stones of the palace could help nudge fate along. Of course, the business of animal magic could sometimes lead to more dramatic displays. There are tales of nobles importing rare animals, an albino deer, a pair of white doves, even in one particularly extravagant case, a baby elephant to parade through the gardens and mark an auspicious day for conception. If you're picturing a parade that looks like something out of a fairy tale, you're not far wrong. And if you're picturing the stable master quietly pulling his hair out, well, you're even closer. But as always, not every ritual worked as planned. Sometimes the frog escaped. Sometimes the prized rabbit had other ideas. Sometimes, despite the best efforts of horses, doves, and even unicorn horns, the hoped-for heir failed to appear. In those moments, the laughter faded, replaced by quiet disappointment. Yet, more often than not, another animal, another symbol, another ritual would be tried the next month, and the next, as if hope itself could be kept alive on paws and wings and hooves. Even the most practical nobles found themselves caught up in the pageantry. Some tried to mask their faith in these rituals as simple tradition, but everyone knew when a duchess began collecting silver fish charms or a prince grew particularly fond of feeding the swans, something more than mere amusement was at play. In the end, whether through laughter or longing, noble houses wove the animal world into the very fabric of their dreams for the future. Each amulet tucked beneath a pillow, each animal carved in wood or stone, was a tiny prayer for continuity, for life, for luck, for a family line that would thrive long after the tapestries faded and the last songbird left the garden. And as you leave the menagerie of symbols and stories behind, you realize that every noble house is built not just on stone and blood, but on the soft footprints of rabbits, the hopeful croak of frogs, and the silent wishes carried on the wings of doves. You move deeper into the labyrinth of noble life, finding yourself in a place where the boundaries between the heavens and the earth seem thin, where the stars themselves are believed to hold sway over who is born, who is blessed, and who is forgotten. Here, in candlelit chambers and quiet studies, noble families consult the strange and intricate arts of astrology, divination, and omens in their relentless quest for an heir. Tonight, you become the quiet observer of how the future of royal lineages was written not just in blood, but in the sky. Here, in candlelit chambers and quiet studies, noble families consult the strange and intricate arts of astrology, divination, and omens in their relentless quest for an heir. Tonight, you become the quiet observer of how the future of royal lineages was written not just in blood, but in the sky. Astrology and fortune-telling were not mere amusements among the noble class. They were as serious as marriage contracts and as essential as bedchamber rituals. Every major house seemed to have its own resident astrologer, a scholar in flowing robes, ink-stained fingers forever tracing patterns across parchment. His, and sometimes her, job was to chart the paths of planets and stars, translate their language, and advise lords and ladies when and sometimes with whom to conceive a child. You can almost hear the slow, reassuring drone of the astrologer's voice. Mars is in ascendance, my lady. The moon is waxing, and Venus smiles upon your house. If you wish for a son, tonight is the night. Sometimes the predictions were delivered with awe-inspiring certainty, and sometimes with the vague hedging of a modern weather forecast. But for many noble families, these charts were as binding as law. Planning for a royal birth was rarely left to chance. The right alignment of planets, the correct phase of the moon, even the hour of the night, All these could mean the difference between a healthy heir and a lifetime of disappointment. It wasn't unusual for a hopeful couple to wait weeks or months for the stars to align according to the astrologer's charts. If you thought long-distance relationships required patience, try explaining to a nervous duke why he must wait until Jupiter moves out of Capricorn before he can even attempt to produce an heir. Horoscopes weren't limited to planning conception, they also became vital tools during pregnancy. The moment a noble woman missed her cycle, the astrologer was summoned to cast a chart, examining her birth date, her husband's, and the moment of their union. The outcome would be debated, written in a special book, and shared only with the closest confidantess. If the omens were favourable, the house rejoiced. If not, there might be secret rituals to remedy the alignment. Offerings to saints, an extra candle at the family altar, or a hastily planned pilgrimage. Omens, too, played their part. The world was alive with signs: a shooting star, a sudden thunderstorm, a fox crossing the road at sunrise. Birds were especially important. The sight of 2 doves nesting in a palace eave, a stork circling the chimney, or a robin singing by the window could send waves of hope or dread through an entire household. In one French legend, a queen saw a raven fly across the moon the night she conceived, and she later named her son after the bird. In Hungary, finding a feather on the doorstep was cause for celebration, a sign that a new soul was on its way. Not all omens were so gentle. A broken mirror in the bedchamber, a dog howling at dusk, or the sound of bells tolling unexpectedly could spark genuine panic. Servants were dispatched to set things right. Fresh flowers in every room, holy water sprinkled on thresholds, and in more than one account, the hurried burning of last year's linens. The goal was always the same: to banish bad luck and invite in the good, to tilt the balance of fate just a little in the family's favour. Sometimes omens appeared in dreams. Noble women kept dream diaries, waking in the night to jot down images and feelings. A dream of a golden fish swimming in clear water was considered especially lucky, while nightmares of storms or empty cradles required immediate intervention, perhaps a prayer to a saint, or a new charm sewn into the mattress. The court midwife doubled as a dream interpreter, telling anxious ladies that a tree heavy with fruit foretells sons, but a garden full of thorns means patience is required. If only modern sleep apps could offer such dramatic prophecies. Even the moment of birth was carefully timed, when possible, to ensure a lucky arrival. If a noble woman's labour began under the wrong stars, midwives and physicians might delay things with gentle teas or herbal compresses. Conversely, if the stars were right, servants rushed to speed the process, lighting candles, chanting prayers, or in more than one frantic account, physically rocking the bed to encourage a prompt entrance. The baby's first cry was not just a relief, it was a sign, a message from fate itself. Naming a child was another opportunity for astrological intervention. Charts were drawn up, and names chosen to honour the planet or star most in favour at the hour of birth. This is why, across Europe, you'll find noblemen named after planets, saints, and mythological heroes. In some families, a secret name was whispered to the newborn, a name known only to the parents and astrologer, said to guard the child from misfortune and jealous spirits. The astrologer's power was not absolute. When predictions failed, when a long-awaited child was stillborn, or a promised son turned out to be a daughter, there was always someone to blame: the stars, the servants, a rival's jealous magic. Yet the belief in celestial influence endured, passed from mother to daughter, lord to heir. Each generation added its own rituals, its own stories of omens heeded and warnings ignored. As the years passed, astrology mingled with other forms of divination: tarot cards and scrying mirrors, the reading of palms and tea leaves. Every method was tried at least once by a house desperate for an answer. In Italy, it was said that the first child to touch the newborn's cradle would shape its destiny, so families vied to ensure the most fortunate relative got the honour. In Scotland, wise women read the ashes from the hearth, searching for patterns that foretold health or heartache. For all its seriousness, this world of omens and astrology wasn't without its lighter side. The resident astrologer, who spent half his nights peering into the heavens, became the butt of many a palace joke. Is Mercury in retrograde, or did the chef just burn the pudding? Better not plant the turnips until Venus approves. One clever duchess kept a little book of her own predictions, delighting in making up new portents. If the left boot is lost on a Tuesday, expect an unexpected visitor, probably your mother-in-law. The rituals around omens became family folklore, woven into bedtime stories and dinner table banter. Children grew up learning to count magpies, greet the moon, and never ever cut their nails after sunset. Old uncles were asked for their lucky coin tosses, and grandmothers, keepers of the household wisdom, were revered for their encyclopedic knowledge of signs and portents. Even the most skeptical courtiers couldn't help glancing over their shoulders when an owl hooted twice in the garden. But perhaps the greatest power of these beliefs was the hope they provided. In a world where so much was uncertain, where plague, war, and accident could strike without warning, the sense that the stars themselves cared about your family was a comfort, however fanciful. Each ritual, each chant, each nervous glance at the sky was a way of saying, "We are not alone. We are guided, watched, and if we are lucky, blessed." Sometimes the omens proved true. A long-awaited heir arrived on a night of shooting stars, and the story was told and retold for generations. Sometimes fate disappointed, and a bitter joke became the only solace. Yet always, the noble houses looked to the heavens, seeking a pattern in the chaos, a little order in the whirlwind of life. You slip from the astrologer's study, past the rows of candles and shelves of ancient charts, and step outside. Above you, the night sky sparkles, mysterious and eternal. Somewhere, a new family stands at a window, gazing up, wondering what the future holds, and if perhaps their fate is already written among the stars. You wander from the lofty stargazing towers and into quieter cloisters, a space at the margins of noble life yet woven inextricably into it. Here, in echoing stone halls and shadowed gardens, you discover a hidden world of monastic wisdom, where monks and nuns quietly shaped the fate of families desperate for children. Tonight you step into the delicate, often secretive, relationship between noble houses and the religious orders whose whispered advice and discreet rituals offered hope when all else failed. It's early morning, the palace is still, but the abbey a mile away is already alive with chanting voices. Smoke from the kitchen hearth curls through the herb gardens, where a young nun gathers leaves by lantern light. Her fingers move expertly from sage to rue to wormwood, her mind occupied with the tasks of the day, but also perhaps with the needs of the noble family whose crest adorns the abbey's chapel window. For while monasteries and convents were places of spiritual retreat, they were also for centuries informal centers of knowledge about the mysteries of conception, childbirth, and when necessary, divine intervention. For many noble women, the monastic world was both a comfort and a lifeline. Letters traveled back and forth, carefully coded in case they fell into the wrong hands. Requests for prayer, for healing herbs, for a special novena or vigil. The nuns, trained in the ancient arts of medicine and midwifery, responded with counsel that straddled the line between faith and science. Sometimes, their advice was as simple as a recipe for tea, fennel and lemon balm, perhaps to warm the womb. Other times, it involved elaborate rituals, an embroidered cloth blessed on the feast of St. Anne, a special mass, said at midnight, a candle lit for 9 consecutive nights. The monks too were called upon, especially by noblemen plagued by doubts or rumours of cursed bloodlines. In their libraries, beneath the gaze of centuries-old icons, they pored over manuscripts filled with remedies and prayers. Some volumes dated back to the Greeks and Romans, brimming with recipes for seed-strengthening elixirs and methods for timing conception to favour sons or daughters. Occasionally, a monk would offer advice on diet, eat more almonds, avoid ill, or recommend a pilgrimage to a distant shrine, where a particular saint was known to grant children to those who prayed with sufficient humility and sometimes a suitable donation. A favourite remedy among the nuns was the womb girdle, a long embroidered ribbon inscribed with prayers, saints' names, or even passages from the Psalms. Noble women wrapped it around their waists at night, believing its blessings would guard the cradle and open the gate of life. There are records of queens who refused to travel anywhere without their girdles, and of duchesses who, after years of disappointment, credited the birth of an heir. to the careful stitching of a particular convent sisters. The line between faith and magic was, as ever, a fine one. Other monastic interventions took the form of relics and sacred water. A bottle of water from a holy well, sprinkled over the marriage bed, was said to bring luck. More daring souls bathed in the springs themselves, often at dawn or twilight, shivering but hopeful as nuns sang hymns from the bank. Sometimes, small relics, a splinter of a saint's bone, a strip of cloth, were sewn into pillows or tucked into the walls above the bed. Such tokens, blessed by the abbot or abbess, were believed to ward off evil winds and help the soul of the child find its way. Not all monastic assistance was so overt. Many nuns and monks acted as discreet intermediaries, shielding noble families from gossip. If a pregnancy was lost, the family could send word to the convent for prayers without the news ever reaching the court. If a new remedy was needed, the sisters would slip it quietly into a basket of bread or herbs sent as a gift. In this way, religious houses became both safe havens and clandestine clinics, protecting the dignity of the noble families they served. The relationship could be complicated. Sometimes, noble women chafed at the abbess's strictures: no worldly remedies during Lent, no visits to certain shrines without permission. Occasionally there was tension between the advice of the court physician and that of the monastic healers. One famous quarrel in France saw a royal doctor denouncing a convent's herbal tonics as superstitious nonsense, only to be overruled when the Queen insisted that the sisters know what the body needs as well as the soul. In England, a rumour spread of a nun who had hexed a noble family for failing to pay for her prayers. A story likely invented by a jealous rival, but it is enough to cause a flurry of gifts and apologies from the guilty household. For the most part, though, the monastic role was one of quiet service. Nuns and monks kept meticulous records, passing their knowledge from one generation to the next. They invented new remedies and rituals, blended pagan wisdom with Christian doctrine, and made themselves indispensable to the noble families who depended on them. If a miracle occurred, a long-awaited pregnancy, a healthy heir, the news was celebrated in both palace and cloister. If it didn't, the prayers continued, and so did the patient work of hope. The monastic world was full of small, tender rituals. On the Feast of the Visitation, noble women might walk barefoot through the cloister gardens, trailing their hands through rosemary and mint. In the chapel, candles were arranged in circles or spirals, each flame representing a wish or a lost hope. The nuns sang softly as the women prayed, their voices rising and falling like the tides. Sometimes a sister would take a noble woman's hand and trace a cross on her palm, whispering, "Your story is written in the book of life. Have faith." Men found their own comfort here. Noblemen too proud to show their fears in public would confess them to a kindly old abbot who would listen, offer a draught of herbal wine, and promise to say a special mass for the family line. Occasionally, the abbot would press a sprig of blessed basil into the Lord's hand, murmuring that even kings must trust in the gifts of heaven. In times of tragedy, miscarriage, stillbirth, or endless barrenness, the monastery or convent became a place of mourning as well as hope. Noble women retreated for days or weeks, fasting and praying with the sisters, sometimes emerging with renewed faith, sometimes with only a brittle mask of acceptance. Yet, in these hidden spaces, grief was allowed to breathe, and the burden was shared. Even as science advanced, the monastic connection endured. Noble women who tried the latest imported remedy might still ask the abbess to bless it before use. If a new physician arrived, he would often seek out the advice of the oldest nun in the region. And when a miracle birth occurred after years of waiting, rituals and remedies, both palace and cloister rang with celebration. Bells tolled, candles were lit, and the entire household feasted, thanking both heaven and the quiet wisdom of those who watched over them. Amid all the striving, rituals, and hope, there is space for humour, too. The sisters, no strangers to palace gossip, told their own stories in the evenings. The countess wanted a potion for twins. I sent her twice as much as usual. Brother Anselm says almonds are good for sons. He eats a whole basket a day and has only daughters. Even the gravest matters found a little lightness in shared laughter and gentle teasing. As the day ends and the cloister bells ring for vespers, you linger at the edge of the garden, watching the last rays of sun catch on the stained glass. The noble world may be full of grand gestures and strange customs, but here, among the stones and flowers, you find a gentler, quieter magic, a kind of hope that lives in whispered prayers, the rustle of herbs, and the hands of those who serve in secret. And with a final breath of rosemary and candle wax, you slip away from the abbey's shadow, carrying with you the memory of a faith that persists, quietly and steadfastly, through all the joys and heartbreaks of a noble house's endless search for an heir. Leaving behind the quiet cloisters and gentle laughter of nuns, you slip back into the busy halls of noble life, a place where hope, superstition, and desperation often crystallize into small, tangible objects, talismans. Here, in the drawers of dressing tables, sewn into bodices, or clutched secretly under pillows, lie the lucky charms and curious amulets that noble men and women trusted as silent guardians of their deepest hopes. Tonight, you find yourself surrounded by the secret world of fertility talismans, a gallery of objects as strange, diverse, and personal as the people who believed in them. The story of talismans is as old as human longing itself. For the nobles, who had everything that gold and power could provide but still faced the same uncertainties as any parent-to-be, these objects were the last precious resort, each one promised, sometimes quietly, sometimes with garish confidence, to sway fate, tip the scales, or simply offer a little comfort in a world that could seem capricious and cold. Begin, perhaps, with the simplest forms, tokens from the natural world, a smooth stone, worn by centuries of anxious fingers, carried in a velvet pouch or sewn into the lining of a noblewoman's gown. In France, it was common for ladies to keep a piece of amber or coral close to the skin, believed to draw out the bad humors and protect against envy. Pearls, endlessly recurring, symbolized purity and the wish for a healthy child. A single pearl, worn around the neck or stitched into a nightcap, was a quiet plea for a peaceful birth. Then there were the more elaborate charms, handmade amulets, whose very construction was a ritual. A silver spoon engraved with a saint's name, to be tucked beneath the mattress on the night of hopeful conception. A brooch in the shape of a crescent moon, its points touching a small crystal droplet, to capture the moon's generative powers. Many noble women owned little bags, or girdles of charms, filled with dried herbs, mugwort for warmth, rosemary for protection, and marjoram for quickening. The bags were sometimes scented, sometimes left plain, but always guarded jealously, a personal insurance policy against fate's whims. Not all talismans were beautiful. Some were odd, even grotesque. In parts of Italy and Spain, women wore tiny amulets shaped like the human womb, crafted from clay or copper, dangling from a chain beneath their clothing. It was said that these womb idols, hidden from public view, would attract the attention of helpful spirits or saints. In Hungary, a more playful tradition saw noble women carrying little wooden dolls, each with a painted smile and a tiny seed inside, whispering wishes to them each night. The servants sometimes joked that the dolls had their own personalities and should not be left alone in a room with cats. One of the most powerful talismans was the Hand of Fortune, a tiny hand-shaped pendant made of silver, coral, or ivory, inscribed with protective symbols. Often given to brides on their wedding day, it was supposed to catch blessings and ward off jealousy. There's an old story about a countess who wore hers so constantly that the hand eventually broke from its chain. When she finally conceived after years of waiting, she had it repaired with gold and passed it to her daughter as a family heirloom. There were talismans that came with stories too. Some were believed to be ancient, passed down from mother to daughter through the generations. A sapphire ring with a long and colourful history, worn by every woman in our family who bore twins, a scrap of faded blue cloth, the colour of Mary's veil, kept in a carved box and only taken out at the most desperate times. There's something deeply touching about these objects, the way they connect one woman's hope to the quiet prayers of those who came before her. A scrap of faded blue cloth, the colour of Mary's veil, kept in a carved box and only taken out at the most desperate times. There's something deeply touching about these objects, the way they connect one woman's hope to the quiet prayers of those who came before her. Not all talismans were acquired peacefully. There were tales of theft, one duchess borrowing her cousin's lucky spoon, a count secretly prying a silver charm from a church door at midnight. Sometimes rivalries grew fierce. In one Spanish court, two noblewomen fought bitterly over a relic said to ensure sons. When the owner at last conceived, the story goes, she sent her rival a pie with a clay doll baked inside. Was it a taunt, a joke, or a warning? The palace gossip lasted for years. Men, too, had their charms, though often hidden under a pretense of practicality. A duke might carry a coin blessed by a pilgrim in his purse, or wear a belt studded with small stones for strength. Swords and daggers were engraved with fertility runes, and the more superstitious nobles preferred to tie a red thread around the hilt for luck before entering the marriage bed. One English lord wore a garter embroidered with a secret prayer, which he insisted brought him robust children and restful nights, though, as his wife pointed out, the garter was usually under the bed by morning. The rituals attached to these charms were as important as the objects themselves. A talisman might need to be fed with a few drops of oil each new moon, or washed in dew at dawn on Midsummer's Day. Some had to be worn only at night, others never during a thunderstorm. There were even instructions for passing them to the next generation. Only give this charm to a daughter on the first full moon after her wedding. It's a wonder the nobles kept track of all the rules. The variety of charms reflected the diversity of beliefs. In some places, noble women favored Christian icons, tiny crosses, rosary beads, splinters of saints' relics wrapped in silk. In others, pagan symbols persisted beneath the surface, a small carved spiral for the cycles of life, or a feather tied with red string to invite the blessing of the wind. You might find an Egyptian scarab beetle tucked in a jewelry box, a Roman coin sewn into a cloak, or even a small pouch of salt hidden in a boot, to keep away bitterness. Some families grew so superstitious that their children wore more charms than clothing. One Italian princess, the story goes, arrived at her wedding with a necklace so heavy with amulets that she had to remove it before kneeling at the altar. The priest, upon seeing her collection, declared that if hope could be measured in silver, your house would never lack for heirs. Yet, for all the seriousness, there was room for play. Ladies-in-waiting swapped charms in secret, testing each other's luck. Young wives bragged about new talismans received as wedding gifts, comparing whose had the oldest provenance or the most miracles attached. Occasionally, a court jester would mock the whole business, wearing every charm he could find and declaring himself the most fertile fool in France. The laughter, as always, was a balm against the weight of expectation. Children became part of the ritual too. When a noblewoman conceived, she might sew a new charm into the baby's first blanket or hang a little silver bell above the cradle. These tokens were meant to draw down blessings, but also to reassure a mother who had waited and worried and prayed for so long. If a talisman failed, if despite all charms and rituals the hoped-for child did not come, its owner might bury it in the garden, toss it in a river, or even burn it on a night when the moon was dark. Give your troubles to the earth, the saying went, and let the wind carry your sorrows. But more often a failed charm was simply passed on, its power recharged by the next hopeful heart. There's a strange, beautiful resilience to the way hope travels, even through disappointment. For every charm that was treasured, there was another that was forgotten, lost in a drawer, slipped into the lining of a gown, or left behind in a country manor. Generations later, a maid or tailor might stumble upon a tiny pouch of seeds, a faded blue ribbon, or a scrap of coral, and wonder at its meaning. Perhaps in the end, the real magic was not in the objects themselves, but in the faith, longing, and stories that surrounded them. And as you move from room to room, the quiet clink of charms in your pocket and the scent of dried herbs in the air, you realize that the world of noble fertility was built not just on grand gestures, but on these small, private hopes. Each charm a whispered wish, each talisman a prayer, each ritual a testament to the stubborn, shimmering light of hope that refuses to be extinguished. You step out of the noblewoman's bedchamber, pockets full of talismans, the air still humming with hope and nerves, and make your way along stone corridors toward a larger horizon. Tonight your journey follows the footsteps of desperate nobles on pilgrimage as they leave behind courtly comforts for the dust and mystery of the open road. In a world where remedies, charms and prayers at home have failed, there remains the last resort, a sacred journey to a shrine, often far-flung, sometimes barely more than a mossy stone in a forgotten forest, where it is said the impossible can happen. It's easy to imagine a noble party setting out at dawn, servants bustle about, packing cloaks, sturdy shoes and, naturally, a small fortune in offerings. A cart creaks under the weight of gifts for the shrine, bolts of silk, gold coins, wax candles the size of a child, or a painted wooden heart to leave behind as a token of longing. The noblewoman herself, wrapped against the early chill, rides at the center of the procession, anxiety and hope competing on her face. If her husband is along, he might look grim or embarrassed. Few things deflate a duke's pride like the public admission that his family needs a miracle. Some pilgrimages are grand, with horses, banners and musicians. Others are secretive, a handful of loyal companions sneaking away at dawn so as not to attract the wrong sort of attention. Sometimes a midwife or trusted confessor travels with them, guiding the prayers, carrying secret relics, or whispering advice about which saints respond best to what sort of gift. In any case, it is an act of hope, and sometimes of desperation. The destinations are as varied as the nobles themselves. Some set their sights on world-famous shrines, Santiago de Compostela in Spain, St. Anne's Shrine in Brittany, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Here, among the press of pilgrims and the glow of hundreds of candles, hopeful families kneel side by side with peasants and beggars. Rank and wealth vanish in the hush of sacred places. Everyone is equal in longing and vulnerability. But most noble pilgrimages, especially those for fertility, head to smaller, stranger sites, each with its own reputation for miracles. A spring in the Black Forest, said to be blessed by a hermit who once raised a child from the dead, a cave in Italy, where the bones of a martyred virgin are said to grant easy births, a windswept hill in Ireland, home to a standing stone worn smooth by centuries of women who walked around it, barefoot and in silence, before sunrise. And then there are the truly bizarre shrines, a tree where bees once built a hive in the shape of a swaddled infant, a rock said to have cried milk on the night a local noblewoman conceived. These places are the realm of folk legend and collective memory, half sacred, half superstition, wholly irresistible to those in need. The rituals performed at these shrines are as varied as their locations. At one, you might be asked to wash your hands in a spring at midnight. At another, to tie a scrap of cloth to a thorn bush, each knot a prayer for a healthy child. In Brittany, hopeful women leave tiny shoes carved from wood at St. Anne's altar, while in Italy, it's customary to bring a ribbon of the future mother's hair to be buried near the saint's bones. In Hungary, the tradition is to carry a loaf of bread 3 times around a certain hill and share it with the poor. Sometimes the rituals verge on the theatrical, a symbolic rebirth in a shallow pool, a ceremonial procession through a stone arch, or the lighting of exactly 9 candles, 1 for each month of pregnancy. No pilgrimage is without its hazards. The roads can be rough, the weather unpredictable, servants get lost, carts break down, and the ever-present danger of thieves or illness hovers at the edge of every campfire. Yet for most noble women, the physical discomfort is nothing compared to the gnawing anxiety. Will it work? Will the saint, or whatever power watches over this place, hear my prayer? Each night, after the prayers are said and the offerings left, the waiting is the hardest part. There's also the curious democracy of suffering. In the candlelit hush of a chapel, a duchess may kneel beside a village girl, both praying for the same miracle. Sometimes the noblewoman's wealth earns her a private blessing, or a bed in the best inn, but in the eyes of the shrine, all are equal supplicants. For a few days, titles and fortunes slip away, replaced by the simple aching hope that fate might be swayed by humility and persistence. Of course, there are rules and every shrine has its own quirks. At one church, the priest might insist that only the woman herself can light the votive candle. At another, the entire household must walk backward around the altar 3 times. Some sites require gifts of honey, others demand silence. Still others only accept prayers on particular feast days. There are shrines that insist on a fast before the pilgrimage, and others that end in a celebratory feast. In every case, the rules are followed with a mixture of reverence, nervousness, and occasional e-rolling from the more skeptical members of the party. Every pilgrimage is also a social event, sometimes awkwardly so. Rival noblewomen might run into each other at a famous spring, exchanging forced smiles and competitive glances over whose offerings are most extravagant. More than one miracle has been rumoured to occur conveniently after a major donor's visit, prompting a wave of thinly veiled gossip back at court. Did you hear? The Countess of Westvale has finally conceived. Must have been all those gold candlesticks she left at St. Aveline's. Servants, too, create their own parallel world of stories. At the fireside, they whisper tales of shrines, where the saints are capricious, helpful to some, but quick to punish those who offend them. Don't fall asleep in the chapel, goes one tale, or the Virgin will turn your hair white, another warns. If you forget your offering, you'll return home with 2 headaches for every child. Even the mules and horses, it's said, can become unlucky if they step in the wrong puddle near a holy well. For all the solemnity, there's humour too. The sight of a noblewoman's stern husband forced to join a line of barefoot supplicants, or the youngest lady's maid tasked with gathering wild flowers at dawn while trying to keep her shoes clean. These moments become stories retold for years. Children born after a pilgrimage are often given names reflecting the place or saint who is credited with the miracle: Compostela, Guinefor, Anne-Marie, Petronilla. And if 2 children arrive in the same season from families who travel together, you can bet that the old midwife will claim it's because they knotted their ribbons at the shrine in the exact same way. For the most devout, a successful pilgrimage brings more than hope. It brings obligations. When a child is born, a new offering must be made. A silver rattle, a miniature cloak, a painting of the infant swaddled in blue. Some noble women return every year to give thanks, sometimes bringing their children, sometimes returning alone, lost in memory of prayers that were answered or never spoken aloud. When the pilgrimage fails, the return home is quieter. The hopeful party unpacks their bags, stores away leftover offerings, and resumes the old rituals. Yet, even here, something has shifted. A new story to tell, a new last hope tried, and the comfort of knowing that at least for a while, the journey itself was an act of faith, community, and longing. Occasionally, the most memorable shrines are the ones least expected. A small chapel by a windswept sea, where a storm drives the party to shelter, and a priest, surprised but obliging, lights a candle for the lady and gives her a shell to remind you that patience brings its own tide. Or a clearing in a quiet forest, where an ancient oak stands wrapped with ribbons from generations of women, the wind carrying their wishes into the leafy canopy above. At the end of every pilgrimage, no matter the outcome, the memory lingers. Some noble women keep a stone or a leaf from the shrine in their pocket. Others tie a new ribbon to their bed at home. A few write down their prayers and lock them away, not to be read until the hoped-for child is grown. For every household, the story becomes another layer in the tapestry of tradition. When all else fails, we travel. We hope. We ask the world for a miracle, and sometimes, if we're lucky, the world answers. For every household, the story becomes another layer in the tapestry of tradition. When all else fails, we travel. We hope. We ask the world for a miracle, and sometimes, if we're lucky, the world answers. And as you rest for a moment at the edge of a quiet road, watching the sunrise gild the roofs of a distant village, you understand that pilgrimage is less about destination than about hope. A journey of the spirit as much as the body, an act of believing in possibility, no matter how many times hope has been bruised. The path, though winding and rough, is always worth taking, for it is paved with faith, longing, and the silent prayers of countless others who have walked before. You leave behind the roads and ribbons of pilgrimage, winding back through stone archways into the hushed, flickering glow of candlelit chambers. Here you find the true architects of birth, midwives, moving quietly through the private rooms and bustling corridors of noble estates. In a world obsessed with heirs and bloodlines, these women held keys to a powerful, shadowy knowledge. Tonight, you become witness to the often hidden, sometimes controversial, always fascinating world of noble midwives and their forbidden arts. In a world obsessed with heirs and bloodlines, these women held keys to a powerful, shadowy knowledge. Tonight, you become witness to the often hidden, sometimes controversial, always fascinating world of noble midwives and their forbidden arts. Midwives in noble households were more than just caretakers of birth. They were trusted advisors, herbalists, guardians of secrets, and sometimes the very last hope for families desperate to see a healthy child. To be chosen as a noblewoman's midwife was a mark of respect, and sometimes suspicion. The midwife walked a narrow line, respected for her skills, yet whispered about for the mysteries she carried. In a place where the failure to produce an heir could topple fortunes, her role was at once celebrated and perilous. Noble midwives, unlike their rural sisters, often arrived with years of experience and a toolkit packed with remedies learned in shadow and secrecy. They might have apprenticed in great cities or learned at the feet of mothers and grandmothers who served noble houses for generations. A well-known midwife could command high fees, generous gifts, and even lifelong pensions if her work produced results. Yet, for all their social standing, midwives were outsiders in the court's inner circles. The knowledge they wielded was both practical and mystical, a blend of hands-on experience, herbal lore, and whispered ritual. It was not unusual for a midwife's bag to contain both the sharp knives and clean linen needed for emergencies, and tiny pouches of dried herbs, strange amulets or little books of incantations. For noble births, the midwife's first duty was to ensure privacy and calm. She managed who could enter the birthing chamber and when, sometimes banishing even the anxious husband or meddling mother-in-law. Before the birth, she might smudge the chamber with fragrant smoke, juniper, rosemary, or mugwort, to clear the air of lingering bad luck or fear. If the birth was difficult or the noblewoman's history troubled, a priest might be summoned to bless the room, but just as often, it was the midwife's own whispered prayers and ancient songs that soothed the laboring mother. Preparation began weeks before birth. Midwives instructed noble women to rest and follow special diets, rich in warming foods and easily digestible broths. Sometimes they prescribed birth cakes, small pastries filled with dates, almonds and honey, believed to give strength and sweetness to the labor. The mother-to-be was also encouraged to sleep with lucky charms, a hand-carved spoon, a stone warmed by the sun, a bundle of healing herbs beneath her pillow. But the real secrets began once labor started. The midwife would check the baby's position with her skilled hands, massaging gently, sometimes coaxing a stubborn child into the right place. She brought with her an arsenal of herbal medicines, teas and tinctures to strengthen contractions, salves to ease pain, oils to anoint the belly or temples. She watched for signs, a sudden drop in temperature, a change in the rhythm of breathing, the movement of clouds outside the window, believing that the world itself might give hints about the coming birth. Sometimes, when labor was long and hope seemed to wane, the midwife resorted to forbidden knowledge. She might murmur a charm under her breath, draw secret symbols on the mother's skin with a drop of blessed oil, or press an amulet into her hand for strength. Some midwives called upon the names of old pagan goddesses, hidden beneath prayers to the Virgin Mary. Others sang lullabies known only to their lineage, songs thought to guide the child's soul safely into the world. There are stories, half legend, half memory, of midwives who spoke to the child through the mother's belly, coaxing, bargaining, even gently scolding, until the baby arrived. Controversial though they were, these practices often proved effective. Noble women placed their trust in midwives over doctors or priests, especially when previous births had ended in sorrow. The midwife's reputation was built on her outcomes. A healthy mother and child earned her the loyalty of the whole estate. A death, even if unavoidable, could lead to disgrace or worse. Some noble houses protected their midwives fiercely, refusing to allow male doctors into the birthing room, while others cycled through midwives like seasons, always searching for one with the most potent luck. With success came reward. A favored midwife might be granted a room in the palace, generous clothing, and enough gifts to set her family for life. She could become a confidant, even a power broker, swapping secrets with the lady of the house, or quietly advising on matters far beyond childbirth. Some became so famous that their services were sought by rival houses, leading to bidding wars and heated disputes. One legendary midwife, Madame Jeanne, was said to have travelled across Europe in a velvet-lined carriage, summoned by queens and duchesses who would pay any price for her attendance. Yet, in the shadow of admiration, there was fear. Midwives who failed were accused of incompetence, or worse, witchcraft, jealousy, or intentional sabotage. The line between herbal medicine and poison was razor thin, and jealous rivals sometimes whispered of accidental deaths or mysterious miscarriages. If a noble woman died in childbed, rumors spread quickly. More than one midwife had to flee in the night, seeking sanctuary in a convent or distant estate. The knowledge passed from midwife to apprentice was guarded fiercely. Recipes for potions, the best techniques for turning a breech baby, the right words to whisper over a difficult labor. These were treasures shared only with the most trusted. Some wrote their secrets in code, or never wrote them at all. The most famous families claimed their own hereditary midwives, whose daughters and granddaughters served the same house for generations. In addition to births, midwives also managed the painful business of loss. If a child was stillborn, or the mother did not survive, the midwife took charge of the body and the rituals of mourning. She wrapped the baby in soft cloth, bathed the mother's brow, and often led the first prayers of farewell. She knew how to comfort the living, even as she prepared the dead, sometimes singing lullabies to the lost child, a practice that haunted the halls long after the family moved on. Not all of a midwife's work was so somber. She was also the architect of celebrations. After a safe birth, the midwife would organize the lying-in, a period of rest and recovery, during which the mother was cared for by her ladies and the baby passed from hand to hand, admired by the whole household. Special foods were prepared, and the rooms were filled with flowers, music and laughter. The midwife received gifts: bread, cheese, silver coins, sometimes even a new dress or jewelry. She was toasted in wine and praised by poets. For a few days her word was law. Yet, even in celebration, the midwife kept watch. She checked the mother's health, monitored the baby's breath and color, and dispensed advice on feeding, swaddling, and sleeping. She watched for signs of trouble: fever, crying, the sudden silence. When others rested, the midwife remained vigilant, moving through dark corridors with a lamp, the silent guardian of new life. The midwife's role extended beyond the birth itself. She was a counselor on matters of fertility, intimacy, and loss, a living encyclopedia of what worked, what didn't, and what might be worth trying one more time. Noble women came to her with secrets they dared not share with husbands, priests, or doctors. She listened without judgment, offering a sympathetic ear, and when needed, a fresh hope in the form of a new charm, a different tea, or a promise to pray to the old mothers who watch over all births. Some midwives were known for special tricks. One might claim a talent for predicting the baby's sex, another for calling down an overdue child by certain songs or dances. Some swore by the power of certain stones or metals, amber for girls, silver for boys, or the influence of the weather, insisting that children born in a thunderstorm will always be strong. These superstitions wove themselves into the fabric of noble birth, half mocking, half believing, wholly embraced when hope demanded it. Perhaps the most secretive aspect of a midwife's knowledge was what she chose not to say. She understood the danger of jealousy, the risks of sharing too much, the fine art of keeping peace among a household full of anxious relatives. She knew how to guide, to reassure, to distract. Sometimes, her greatest gift was not a potion or a charm, but a well-timed story, a gentle touch, or the simple promise that, come what may, she would stay until the end. In rare cases, a midwife became a legend. Her name would be spoken in awe for generations. The one who delivered 5 sons to the House of Valmont, or the saviour of Lady Marguerite in her long night of labour. Her advice was sought by princesses and paupers alike, and her methods, once whispered about in secret, became the new standard for noble households across the land. Yet, even the most skilled midwife knew the limits of her power. Sometimes, despite every remedy and ritual, the hoped-for child did not come, or did not stay. In those moments, the midwife grieved with the family, her own heart heavy with the weight of what could not be changed. As you watch her move through the candlelit corridors, her hands steady, her eyes wise, her footsteps soft on the ancient stones, you understand why she is both feared and beloved. She is the keeper of forbidden knowledge, the guardian of hope, the last friend in the darkest hour. In the story of noble houses and their quest for heirs, the midwife is both the quiet heart and the unsung heroine, weaving life and mystery into every corner of a world obsessed with blood, birth, and the enduring power of hope. You leave the hush of the birthing room, the midwife's wisdom still echoing in your thoughts, and find yourself drawn toward the vibrant, chaotic heart of the noble estate, the great hall. The long tables are cleared, banners unfurled, and the entire household family, retainers and servants alike, gathers in anticipation. For tonight, the noble family is hosting a public spectacle, a fertility pageant that transforms personal longing into collective ritual, blending hope with theatre and anxiety with celebration. For tonight, the noble family is hosting a public spectacle, a fertility pageant that transforms personal longing into collective ritual, blending hope with theatre and anxiety with celebration. Fertility pageants and spectacles were more than just lavish entertainments. They were living symbols, staged reminders to the world that the noble house was invested in the future, that its dreams and its lineage would not simply fade into obscurity. For those in power, the act of performing fertility was both reassurance and propaganda, a show of confidence and a public plea for fate's favour, all played out under the watchful eyes of family rivals and subjects. Preparation for these spectacles began weeks or even months in advance. Seamstresses and tailors laboured over costumes green and gold for abundance, white for purity, and red for the lifeblood of dynasties. Artisans crafted crowns wreathed with wheat stalks, sceptres adorned with crystal eggs, and garlands of fruit and flowers to hang from the rafters. If you looked closely, you'd see symbols woven everywhere. Rabbits for fertility, pomegranates for promise, and twin fish, sometimes leaping, sometimes entwined for luck in producing twins. On the morning of the event, the estate buzzed with purpose. Young women were coached in dances, sometimes slow and solemn, sometimes wild and exuberant, meant to mimic the cycles of nature. Boys were dressed as green men or forest spirits, chasing each other through the halls and occasionally knocking over a platter or two. Even the kitchen got in on the act, producing cakes shaped like swaddled infants, loaves braided into infinity signs, and spiced wine meant to kindle the blood of all who drank. The centerpiece of the pageant was almost always a dramatic tableau. The noble couple would be presented before their guests, not merely as lord and lady, but as archetypes: the sower and the mother, the king and the bountiful queen. Sometimes a procession wound through the estate, led by musicians and torchbearers. The couple, draped in their fertility colours, might pause at a symbolic altar or under a garlanded archway, where a priest, wise woman, or even a costumed spirit of the harvest would bless them with water, wine, or a handful of seeds. Children had important roles too. Daughters in white carried baskets of blossoms, scattering petals in the couple's path, while sons offered bowls of milk or honey, stand-ins for the plenty everyone hoped would soon arrive in the nursery. There might be a formal feeding ritual, where the lady of the house served the first bite of a special fertility pie, cheered on by the watching crowd. In some traditions, women of the estate, especially those with large families, would come forward to offer small gifts or tokens: a piece of lace, a sprig of rosemary, a whispered wish for good luck. The performances themselves could be elaborate. In Renaissance Italy, troupes of actors performed short plays, comic misunderstandings in a mythical orchard, or clever allegories about gardens gone wild until tended by a loving hand. In France, the pageant might include a masked dance, with noblemen and women spinning in patterns, said to entwine the fates of those who wished for children. In England, Morris dancers leapt and stamped to the music of pipes and drums, their ribbons flashing, while the crowd clapped in time. No pageant was complete without spectacle. In the wealthiest courts, there might be fireworks or the release of white doves, symbols of peace and renewal. Sometimes acrobats tumbled and spun, representing the unpredictable twists of fate. The high point of the night might be the ceremonial planting of a tree or a bed of flowers, meant to root the family's hopes in the living earth. For all the public performance, these events were also deeply emotional. The noblewoman at the center of every eye might be buoyed by support or quietly terrified, knowing how much rested on her shoulders. In moments of levity, she might be caught giggling with her sisters or sneaking an extra piece of cake. At other times, she would stand silent, hands folded over her belly, eyes flicking upward in a silent plea to whatever powers might be listening. Guests played their part too. Allies and rivals watched closely, taking note of every gesture, every whispered aside. Was the Lord's grip on his wife's hand a little too tight? Did the lady's smile falter as she received the blessing? Gossip flourished in the shadows of the pageant. I hear Lady Agnes's dress is made from the same cloth as the christening gown of her cousin's miracle child. They say the priest used a relic hidden in the altar just to be sure. No moment was too small for speculation. The servants, meanwhile, made their own fun. In the kitchens, bets were placed on which family would produce the next heir. Children snuck pieces of sweet bread and dared each other to steal a blossom from the garlands, convinced that eating a flower from the pageant will make you lucky for a year. There were practical jokes too, the old butler pretending to bless the cook's ladle, the housemaids tying green ribbons to each other's aprons, and the stable boys releasing a rabbit into the great hall just before the Lord's speech. Pure chaos for a few heartbeats, but laughter for weeks. Amid all this bustle, the real work of the pageant was happening in the hearts and minds of the household. For the noble family, the spectacle was a way to reclaim some agency in the face of uncertainty, a way to say, we are trying, we are hoping, we are willing to do everything, even make fools of ourselves, for the sake of our future. The rituals bound the family together, allowing grief and hope to exist side by side in a form that could be seen, touched, and most importantly shared. Sometimes, the pageant worked its own peculiar magic. There are stories of noble women who conceived within weeks of such celebrations, born of hope, laughter, and a little too much wine, as the old saying goes. Other times, the pageant was remembered for its mishaps, a firework misfiring, a sheep breaking loose from the pen and charging through the crowd, or a rainstorm drenching the entire gathering. These became stories in themselves, retold at every future celebration, proof that fate had a sense of humor and that, in the end, the most important thing was that the family kept hoping. Occasionally, the pageant took on a competitive edge. Noble families would try to outdo one another, staging grander and grander spectacles. One infamous French house hired a famous troupe of Italian performers to enact a mythic birth, complete with gods and goddesses descending from the rafters. Another built a temporary labyrinth in the gardens, inviting guests to wander through and leave their wishes for the family at the heart. These acts were not just about hope, they were about reputation, about proving that no house was more invested in the future than theirs. Yet, for all the spectacle, the heart of the event was always the same, a collective wish, spoken aloud and witnessed by all, that the family would grow, thrive, and endure. The fertility pageant was the noble world's way of turning the private ache of longing into a public act of faith, a promise to the ancestors, the children yet to come, and the world itself that hope would not be given up, no matter how many years passed. As the night draws to a close, the candles gutter low, and the guests depart. The family lingers in the hall, surrounded by flowers, songs, and the warm glow of company. Tomorrow, life will return to its old uncertainties, its rituals and routines, but for tonight, the noble house is united by hope, laughter, and the shared belief that somewhere among all the symbols and songs a new beginning is taking root. And as you leave the great hall, a final cheer echoing in your ears, you realize that these spectacles, half theatre, half magic, are the noble world's greatest gift to itself, a celebration of possibility, an act of stubborn defiance in the face of fate, and most of all, a reminder that hope, when shared, is never truly lost. The hall is quiet again, the banners folded, the garlands wilted on the flagstones. Outside, a chilly breeze stirs, and the moon rises over the old rooftops, silvering every edge. But even as the last echoes of the pageant fade, you find that the story of noble fertility is not finished. Not until it's woven into the hush of daily life, into private corners and unguarded hours, where hope and anxiety, faith and disappointment or folded into the habits of ordinary existence. Tonight, you travel with the noble family as they return to their routines, discovering the ways in which fertility rituals, fears, and wishes become part of life's quiet undercurrent, shaping the rhythms of a house and the hearts of all who dwell there. With the grand ceremonies over, the estate settles back into its cycles, the daily masses and meal bells, the click of the steward's pen, the laughter of children in the nursery, and the soft tread of servants on morning rounds. Yet in every room, from the kitchen to the chapel, there lingers a residue of hope, a collection of small acts and private traditions that keep the flame alive long after the pageants and processions have passed. In the mornings, the lady of the house often rises early, her thoughts turning immediately to signs. Was her sleep deep or restless? Did she dream of gardens, rivers, or children's laughter? She marks the calendar discreetly, tracking cycles and symptoms, her hope wary but stubborn. Sometimes she slips into the garden alone, brushing her hands over the dew-laced rosemary or tucking a sprig of basil into her gown. Small gestures, almost invisible, but weighted with intent. The Lord, for his part, walks the estate with a different sort of vigilance. He checks the stables, watches the herds, and greets his children with a touch of protectiveness, conscious always of the need for a legacy. He listens to the news of births among tenants and servants, sharing in the celebrations or sending quiet condolences, aware that the fortunes of his family are tangled with those of everyone under his roof. Throughout the day, 1,000 superstitions are observed, most so subtle they pass as habit. A coin hidden under the mattress, a prayer whispered before breaking bread, a glance at the sky before the first meal. The cook stirs a certain herb into the soup on Tuesdays. The laundress hangs the baby's blanket so it catches the sunrise. In the nursery, old toys are dusted and repaired to keep hope fresh. The governess insists, so the next child will come to play. Among the servants, the rituals are even more inventive. Housemaids invent songs for sweeping luck into the corners. The butler knocks 3 times on the cellar door each morning to awaken the good spirits. Gardeners tuck fallen feathers, acorns or lucky pebbles into the soil for the roots and the children, both. Even the hounds, those old companions of noble households, wear bits of red ribbon on their collars, just in case. And still, hope and anxiety live side by side. On some days, laughter rings through the corridors, a child's giggle, a joke shared over mending. On others, the house grows silent. When a hoped-for sign does not appear, or when news comes of another family's loss, there are private tears, comforted with tea and quiet words, and the slow, careful return to the small rituals that make endurance possible. The old superstitions adapt themselves to changing times. A new physician arrives, bringing unfamiliar remedies. The midwife's daughter grows into her mother's shoes, inventing her own tricks and tokens. The family priest changes the order of prayers. The cook experiments with new spices from distant lands. Yet beneath every innovation, the pulse of hope persists, sometimes bold, sometimes nearly broken, but never quite extinguished. Children grow up in this world, absorbing its mysteries and its rules. They learn not to ask too many questions about the charms sewn into their clothes, or the odd silent blessings made over their heads. When a sibling is born, the oldest child is allowed to choose a flower for the cradle, or a toy to leave on the family altar. Games invented in the nursery echo the rituals of the adults. Hopscotch patterns shaped like spirals, songs about planting seeds and watching for the moon. Older children, too, are enlisted into the cycles of hope. They are sent to fetch water from the lucky well, to hang new ribbons in the orchard, or to sweep the stairs in silence at dusk. Sometimes these tasks are burdensome, but often they are performed with pride, a way to join in the grown-up world's most important secret, that the future depends on every hope, every act, every superstition, no matter how small. Seasons change, and with them, the nature of the rituals shifts. In spring, the family gathers to plant new trees or scatter flower petals in the gardens. In summer, meals are taken outside to let the sun see our hopes, as the lady said. In autumn, the first fire of the year is lit with a prayer, and chestnuts are roasted as tokens of plenty. Winter brings its own ceremonies. Candles in the window for every child born, cakes shared in the memory of lost little ones, and always a vigil for the promise of another year. In moments of disappointment, the family draws together. The lord brings flowers, the lady leans on her sisters, and the servants light extra candles in the chapel. Words of comfort are borrowed from every tradition. God willing, next year, with luck, hope springs eternal. The old nurse tells stories of families who waited years, only to be blessed in the end. Even in sorrow, the rituals continue. The coins, the herbs, the silent prayers, each one a small rebellion against despair. When at last a child is born, the house erupts with joy. 1,000 rituals rewarded. Bells ring, banners are raised, and every old superstition is suddenly justified. It was the rosemary, I knew it. It was the silver spoon, the blessed water, the night of the full moon. For a few sweet days, hope is no longer a question, but a celebration, and every room is bright with laughter, music, and the soft, relentless promise of new life. And as the house returns to quiet, the cycle begins again. The tokens are passed on, the herbs are replanted, and the next generation of children grows up amid the magic and mystery of hope. So now, as night deepens outside our old stone manor and the moon slips higher in the sky, you find yourself safe in this gentle, candlelit hush. You hear the steady crackle of the hearth and the faint lullaby of distant laughter. The rituals, the tokens, the centuries-old hopes, they linger, soft as the perfume of rosemary and lavender in the air. You sense the peace that follows every storm of longing, the hush that comes when even the busiest house slows and listens to the quiet heartbeat of hope. Let your shoulders relax. Let your breath deepen. Remember, these noble families, so much like us in their longing, never truly gave up, no matter how odd or tangled their customs became. For every anxious night or whispered prayer, there was a moment of gentle togetherness, a smile in the hallway, a flower pressed into a child's hand, a song shared by candlelight. The past is full of these small, stubborn acts of hope, woven through every chamber and echoed in every generation. Tonight, as you rest, imagine yourself beneath the old beams and thick quilts of a noble home, soothed by the faith that your wishes, like theirs, might just drift up to the stars. Carried by 1,000 hands and hearts before you, the world is quiet. The story is safe now, and whether the future holds miracles or simply more gentle days, you are part of an ancient circle of dreamers, always moving, always hoping, always home. Now let the fire dim, let your eyelids grow heavy, and let the soft pulse of these old rituals carry you into rest. Sweet dreams.